And now, our feature presentation.
Nice touch this week on that. All right, guys. Welcome back to another exciting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. We've got a special treat for you guys tonight. A lot of you really enjoyed, and I particularly enjoyed Brandy's reading of Beowulf 2 weeks ago. I think it was a nice something different and a very important thing regarding Asatru to focus on. I think this story adds so much to an understanding of so many core principles of what we do and what we believe. So Brandy is back for part 2 of a planned 3-part, but we can go as long as we need to on it. Discussion and reading of Beowulf. Thinking if there's any real news and updates since last time, and I don't think that there is. Something I did want to touch on before we start, with the meat and taters of today's program. Thanksgiving is tomorrow in the United States. I don't think people celebrate that a lot of other places. But I've met with confusion and opposition in the past when I have posted about that on AFA channels as a celebration that we observe in the Asatru Folk Assembly. For those of you that are outside of the United States and may not know or may not understand, it is a secular-ish holiday in the United States. It's secular in the sense that it's not beholden to a particular faith or a particular denomination, but it is about faith, and it's about being thankful for the blessings in our life. And I want to urge everyone to resist the urge to not do things just because Christians do them. Well, Christians are pious, so we need to be irreverent. Christians take baths, so we need to be filthy. It's silly logic that doesn't make any sense. And I think that taking a day to get together with friends and family and celebrate a feast, giving thanks for all the blessings in our lives, is a good thing for every single person to do, especially and including Asatru. Being thankful for the blessings that we have that's not a Christian thing. That's a good people thing. That's a reverent human being thing. And I think we need to embrace it wholeheartedly. I'm looking forward to it. Always excited about Thanksgiving. Becoming Asatru doesn't mean that you have to give up on all the traditions that you were raised with. It does mean on certain ones of our holidays having to separate a couple of things out here and there. But Thanksgiving's not really one of those. When you give thanks to our gods, the gods of our folk, our blood, and our ancestors. But one thing that I do think is vital about that, especially today, is taking note of all of the things that we have to be thankful for. I think that in certain circles that a lot of us find ourselves in, there is so much focus on negativity all of the time. And I always urge against that. There are so many amazing blessings in our lives. There's so many amazing things happening. And there's so many beautiful opportunities that are before us if we choose to approach the world with thankfulness and optimism, as opposed to hanging our head with focusing on all the negatives. If we don't pick our head up, hold our head high, and look up, we're missing so many opportunities. So keep your head up, keep your chest out, be proud, be thankful for the things we have, and look for the amazing opportunities we have on the horizon. We have done amazing things together in the Asatru Folk Assembly, and we have amazing things yet to come. With that, Brandy, this is This is going to be your show tonight, so go ahead and take the wheel and do your Beowulf thing.
We do have one question I want to get to first, because I think as the other questions we have, we can answer when we go through the fits. But Trent has the question of, what type of creature do you think Grendel and his mother were considered to be before Beowulf's story was Christianized? Were they Jotuns or something else? So I'm going to let you start with that, and then I'll chime in, sir. What is your opinion? Because it's an opinion. There's nothing that says for sure what they are in anything.
It was an opinion. Once I give you my take, it then becomes holy writ.
Whatever the Alshira Gothi says, that's the answer.
That's always the right answer. So Svan's talked about this a lot. There is a tendency in our lore to, when you have to sort things into categories, a lot of the less than good categories are lumped together. And you see that with some of the good categories of beings as well, like the term Alf or Alfar. But there's Jotnar that are primeval, unconscious forces of creation giants that are clearly different from conscious, like, giants that were wizards that get in the wizard battles with the gods in the lore. Both Jotnar, but clearly very different things. And when they talk about, there's also an overlap between Jotnar and trolls. What does a troll mean? Well, a troll means lots of different things. Basically, any scary thing that goes bump in the night gets in that category. And I think that's very much where monstrous and contorted humanoids would fall in. Are they Jotnar? I suppose in a very small J sense of the word. I would probably call them more like trolls. But I think some of the words used to describe these things are also different depending on the time and the locale, and there's a lot of overlap there. So I don't think that there's necessarily an Asatru monsters manual that we can get out and flip to the right page and find the stats on what kind of creature that Grendel winds up in. But I if I had to go, I would go troll.
So now that we're kind of getting more into, Grendel's mother, we're still going to be referencing back to Grendel. So one of the things to remember about what kind of monsters are these, and we'll see this also with the dragon when that comes up in the next episodes. But one thing to really distinguish about the different parts of Beowulf is the different personalities of the monsters themselves. And you can see that represented also in our own lore when you read it from Voluspa all the way through, from the very beginning until Ragnarok. You can see the evolution of the enemies, or the evolution of the monsters or the Jotuns that they face. So Grendel is very much primal. He's very raw. He's very instinct driven. And we're going to see a very, very different monster tonight when we're talking about Grendel's mother. So just also remember, the monsters kind of have a way of talking about the enemies of our people, what our ancestors face, the types of enemies that they face, the types of monsters that they faced, whether those were, enemies across borders or those were enemies that went bump in the night, So we're going to see a very, very big difference between Grendel and Grendel's mother tonight. So keep in mind, when we get into Grendel's mother, Grendel himself was overly large. We want to start off with that. When we're talking about how large Grendel was, we'll get into more of that, in the fits here. But Grendel was huge, outstandingly huge. We're going to see in here where when they bring his head back, it takes several men to carry his head. His arm is enormous. He takes entire men and puts them in a sack, right? In his man purse. So that is one thing about him, is he's larger than life, and he's very primal, he's very raw, and he's very instinctual in the things that he does. There is no real thought or control. We saw Grendel feel fear for the very first time, the last time that we had this podcast. So just keep in mind with the monsters, it's not necessarily what kind of monster, but what does that monster really represent in regards to what it is that we face as a people or as an individual. So I'll add that in there. And with that, we can go ahead and get started if you're ready, sir.
Take it away.
All right. So we're going to follow the same format that we followed last time. We're going to read a part and then go back through and discuss it. So we have already killed Grendel. We've ripped his arm from his body, and it is currently a trophy in the hall. Then morning came, and many a warrior gathered, as I've heard, around the gift hall, clan chiefs flocking from far and near down wide-ranging roads, wondering greatly at the monster's appearance. His fatal departure was regretted by no one who witnessed his trail, the ignominious works of his flight, where he'd skulked away, exhausted in spirit and beaten in battle, bloody in the path, hauling his doom to the demon's mare. The bloodshot water wallowed and surged. There was loathsome upthrows and overturnings of waves and gore and wound slurry. With his death upon him, he had dived deep into his marsh den, drowned out his life and his heathen soul. Hell claimed him there. Then away they rode, the old retainers, with many a young man following after, a troop on horseback, in high spirits on their bay steeds. Beowulf's doings were praised over and over again. Nowhere, they said, north or south, between the two seas or under the tall sky, on the broad earth, was there ever anyone better to raise a shield or to rule a kingdom. Yet there was no laying of blame on their lord, the noble Hrothgar. He was a good king. At times the warband broke into a gallop, letting their chestnut horses race wherever they found the going good on the well-known tracks. Meanwhile, a thane of the king's household, a carrier of tales, a traditional singer deeply schooled in the lore of the past, linked a new theme to a strict meter. The man started to recite with skill, rehearsing Beowulf's triumphs and feats in well-fashioned lines, entwining his words. He told what he'd heard, repeated in songs about Sigmund's exploits, all of those many feats and marvels, the struggles and the wanderings of Vale's sons, things unknown to anyone except to Fitela, feuds and foul doings confided by uncle to nephew when he felt the urge to speak of them. Always they had been partners in the fight, friends in the need. They killed giants, their conquering swords had brought them down. After his death, Sigmund's glory grew and grew because of his courage when he killed the dragon, the guardian of the horde. Under gray stone he had dared to enter all by himself, to face the worst without Fitila. But it came to pass that his sword plunged right through those radiant scales and drove into the wall. The dragon died of it. His daring had given him total possession of the treasure hoard, his to dispose of however he liked. He loaded a boat. Vale's sons weighted her hold with dazzling spoils. The hot dragon melted. Sigmund's name was known everywhere. He was utterly valiant and venturesome, a fence round his fingers, and flourished therefore. After a King Haramond's prowess declined and his campaign slowed down, the king was betrayed, ambushed in Jutland, overpowered and done away with. The waves of his grief had beaten him down, made him a burden, a source of anxiety to his nobles. That expedition was often condemned in those earlier times by experienced men who relied on his lordship for redress, who presumed that the part of his prince was to thrive on his father's throne and defend the nation, the shielding land where they had lived and belonged, its holdings and its strongholds. Such was Beowulf in the affection of his friends and of everyone alive. The evil entered into Haramond. Meanwhile, the dames kept racing their mounts down the sandy lanes. The light of the day broke and kept brightening. Bands of retainers galloped in excitement to the gabled hall to see the marvel. The king himself, guardian of the ring hoard, goodness in person, walked in majesty from the women's quarters with the numerous train attended by his queen and her crowd of maidens across the mead hall. So if you've read Beowulf for the first time, this is a lot of names and this is a lot of things in one little section. So first we start talking about Beowulf did this awesome thing and killed Grendel, and then everyone is gathering over to basically celebrate and see all the things that are going on, to hear the story and to gather in the hall with the king. But then we start talking about two lays within this lay, right? So they're talking about the minstrel is singing a song about Beowulf, which has a lot of things to it. We'll get to that in a second. But there's two lays within this lay. The first thing that they're talking about is Sigmund of the Volsunga saga. So this is actually debated on whether or not that this is the first time that this story is actually noted down in literature. So this is the oldest reference that we have. So when you look at it, it doesn't make a lot of sense unless you know what it is that they're talking about, unless you know about the saga itself and about the story itself. The same with the Tale of Hermod. So the author or the narrator is assuming that you are already familiar with these things, and they are comparing Beowulf to the greatness of killing that dragon. They're basically they're giving his eulogy basically without you knowing that that's what they're doing. They're referring to separate things. So one of the points that they make in here is that they are noting that Beowulf, there is no one more worthy of going to battle with and ruling a kingdom than Beowulf. However, that is not the fault of their king. Their king is a good king, and they make it a point to say that over and over and over again. No matter how great the warrior, this is a good king. And this shows definitely the loyalty to the king itself. The king does not have to be the greatest warrior on the battlefield. He has the loyalty of the warriors on that battlefield. Do you have any thoughts on that, sir? You don't have to be the strongest, but you always have the loyalty of those who are willing to fight for you.
You know, it depends, and I think this adds some of the richness of context that is often overlooked, especially in historic, like epic poetry and in our lore. Everything is very often carried to the extreme. It's, either 100% or nothing, because it's illustrating these larger than life principles on this canvas. Part of the worth of rulership isn't just being the mightiest on the battlefield. It's the fact that you are on the battlefield. It's the fact that you're leading from the front. It's the fact that you're actively engaged and you have skin in the game for your people and your kingdom. There's also, it would be foolish to think that every king is going to be the greatest warrior amongst their people, but celebrating that as if that were the case, because that's the ideal, is what's important. You're going to come across a king that takes the throne when he's a child. He's obviously, your 5-year-old king is not going to go out there and lay waste to his foes. By that token, your 70-year-old king is likely not going to be out there laying waste to the heroes of the opposition. But the idea is still present. The ideal of going out and be the living example of what your folk ought to aspire to be. There's two parts to any leader, to any ruler, especially to any sovereign. And we see this throughout European monarchy. There's the king that is the man, and then there's the king that is the embodiment of the nation. And keeping up appearances and being the hero for your folk is your job as a sovereign. They're going to be real people that have moments of weakness and moments of imperfection, but you try to polish an image as if that doesn't exist. even if you are that old man, you go out there and you charge the enemy, and you hope that your retainers are behind you and going to get there before you, so that you don't have to be in a bad spot. But that image in and of itself makes or breaks battles, especially at this time period and into the medieval period. You see, when the royal banner goes down, people just leave the battlefield because, like, king's dead, we're done. But as long as that banner's up, they'll follow it. And that's symbolic of the king himself in person. As long as that king is there in the thick of things, you don't flee the battlefield, because if you do and the king makes it, you were a coward and you were treasonous. Once the king's done, your obligations are kind of done, pack it up and leave. But you literally rise and fall by that. On the Crusades, you see that with Frederick Barbarossa. He dies before he makes it there, but to keep it going, they prop him up in horseback, Weekend at Bernie style, so people rally behind him, because in him is the embodiment of regality. It's our trouble is, if we're not discerning and we're immediately disgusted by anything that has a Christian overlay to it, it really takes us out of the mindset. When you look at, medieval kingship is obviously ruled by divine right. They're God's representative, and it's your job. They're God's anointed leader of that nation. So you're not just disloyal politically, you are spiritually an apostate if you stand against God's appointed representative. But that's a thing that goes much, much further back. And it's a reason that most all of the royal houses of Europe, come to find out, even the royal house of Spain would trace their lineage back to Odin. The royal house of Sweden would trace it back to Lord Frey. They would trace it back to the gods, taking that piece of the gods with them on the battlefield. They represent the gods in their capacity ruling their nation. So seeing the luck of a king and wanting to stand with it, and picking someone who is victorious and in the thick of the fight all the time, that it's one of the reasons that I push on the 10th virtue of victory. Is victory isn't just a goal to achieve, it in and of itself is a virtue. Your winningness shows a degree of your luck and blessings that you receive from the gods and divine favor that someone has. So it in and of itself is a sign of that you're in the right spot if you're with a war leader or a king that's victorious. And I think that's seen here. But yeah, there's also that dose of reality. You got old men kings that aren't going to be able to be the best. You've got kids, you've got cripples, you've got a lot of people that are in a spot where they can't. But the idea that you still go out there and you're seen leading your men is extremely, extremely important. I mean, there's plenty of examples throughout medieval royalty of that being the case. Baldwin IV of the Kingdom of Jerusalem was notoriously that way. He's a leper. He's literally falling apart, but he's still out there on horseback leading the charge and with his guys. And as long as that was the case, his knights would follow. And a lot of people don't necessarily, it goes without saying for a lot of our audience, but it's worth saying for this broadcast in case people don't get that. Knighthood and chivalry, in their real sense, are very much based on pre-Christian paganism. They're Asatru virtues that evolved in their later years under a Christian overlay. But the principle of mounted warrior nobility being about the lord and retainer relationship goes back well before Christianity and is our thing.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things to note about this in particular is we're going to be coming up on a dragon here in about 2 weeks. And he coincidentally And some say that he made a mistake when he was, writing the story down. But did he though? Because we talk about all of these great deeds that Beowulf did, and then we talk about slaying a dragon, right? One of the big themes of Beowulf is fate will as fate will, weird will as weird will. And we know that our narrator never lies to us, right? We've seen foresight coming up in the story so far, and we see it again here. The narrator is preparing you for what else is to come. So that's going to be a theme that you see as well. You're going to be prepared for all of these things as they happen. He's going to be fighting a dragon later on, and they're already referring to him as a hero that is equivalent to fighting dragons. So that's something to take note of as well, is that there is no way that the minstrel could have known that Beowulf is going to be fighting a dragon later on. But it's not mere coincidence that these things are put into the story. So that's one thing to remember too. All right. So we do have one question I think that we might want to answer before we continue from the Real Madrid Fan 11. If something can be Christian influence, can some things also from Europe be Islamic influence, since a few parts of Europe, like the Balkans, have some European Muslims like Bosnians? What are your thoughts on that, sir?
So, and this, I think this might highly depend on where someone is answering this question. The vast majority of us, and probably of the people watching, Europe to them, I'm making the air quotes, but I got to bring it in because my screen's smaller, is Central, Northern, and Western Europe. I think if you start getting into Ottoman Europe and Greek Europe, and you start getting into like Russian Europe, I think you see a little bit more of that, and you're more likely to encounter it, just like you mentioned in the question. I think if you're dealing with Iberian things, you're much more likely to see some of that. But most of the time, the influence, like Christian influence, isn't hidden. It's writ large for everyone to see. Christian influence in Europe, almost all of the time, is taking a pagan thing and then re-adding and reworking it to put a Christian overlay. So there's not like subtle Christianity seeping into it. I think that's very much a misnomer. I think there's blatant Christianity injected into it in an obvious way. And I think where you might see Muslim influence for the same reason, because it's based on a very similar root religion or root mindset, you would see Islam written over it in big, bold letters, spray painted all over it. So I don't worry about the subtlety of that sneaking in. What I think is much more how it works is for Muslims not to realize that a lot of their lore and a lot of their history comes from pagan sources in pagan parts of Arabia and in different places in pagan Persian things. I think that what's much more likely is European Christians thinking that they're doing all this Christianity when they come to realize that almost none of it is biblical, and what they're doing is various pagan traditions that somebody slapped a saint name on or put a Jesus coat of paint on, much like the story that we're reading. It much predates the conversion of the tribes it talks about to Christianity. But there's a clear, like, they at awkward times inject, like they feel the need to add little references to God throughout, so it remains, kosher with that crowd. But I think those influences are rather obvious. One thing I also saw in the chat about leaders today, not leading from the front, I think, and I'm not disputing that that's the case. I think one of the things we see is that there isn't functional European monarchy, so of course they don't lead from the front. If the monarchy is solely symbolic and they don't command men and they have none of the teeth of monarchy, then why would they lead from the front? And that's really sad to me that it's gotten to that point. But I wonder what that looks like in a modern context, because we're not leading night charges into battle. We're not even leading lines of infantry or lines of tanks. That's not what modern warfare is. So I don't know what that looks like. Like, you'll see when an American president goes to Iraq or Afghanistan or anything like that, all of a sudden everything stops. The entire focus is on security, and it's not productive to leading successful charges. So I wonder what that looks like. And I think that's an interesting challenge should monarchy resurface in a modern or in a future context that way. I wonder what that looks like, because the engagement and the regular embodiment and being part of the struggle of a nation it takes such different forms. It's one of the challenges that I think we all face in Asatru is we see the world through the lens of our epic lore, and we see so many of our values portrayed in a early medieval context. Figuring out how to live those principles, but in the current world that we live in, that isn't battlefield focused, that isn't, everybody is a warrior that's slaying people and fighting for their life every day. What that looks like in our lives is, one of our great challenges.
Thank you, sir. All right, we'll continue on. When Hrothgar arrived at the hall, he spoke, standing on the steps under the steep eaves, gazing at the roofwork and Grendel's talon. First and foremost, let the Almighty Father be thanked for this sight. I suffered a long harrowing by Grendel, but the heavenly shepherd can work his wonders always and everywhere. Not long since, it seems I would never be granted the slightest solace or relief from any of my burdens. The best houses glittered and reeked and ran with blood. This one worry outweighed all others, a constant distress to counselors entrusted with defending the people's forts from assault by monsters and demons. But now a man, with the Lord's assistance, has accomplished something none of us could manage before now, for all our efforts. Whoever she was who brought forth the flower of manhood, if she is still alive, that woman can say that her labor the Lord of Ages bestowed a grace on her. So now, Beowulf, I adopt you in my heart as a dear son. Nourish and maintain this new connection, you noblest of men. There'll be nothing you'll want for, no worldly goods that won't be yours. I have often honored smaller achievements, recognized warriors not nearly as worthy, lavish rewards on the less deserving. But you have made yourself immortal by your glorious action. May the gods of ages continue to keep and requite you well. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. We have gone through the glorious endeavor and been much favored in this fight we dared against the unknown. Nevertheless, if you could have seen the monster himself where he lay beaten, I would have been better pleased. My plan was to pounce, pin him down in a tight grip, and grapple him to death. Have him panting for life, powerless and clasped in my bare hands, his body in thrall. But I couldn't stop him from slipping my hold. The Lord allowed it. My lock on him wasn't strong enough. He struggled fiercely and broke and ran. Yet he bought his freedom at a high price, for he left his hand and arm and shoulder to show he had been here, a cold comfort for having come among us. And now he won't be long for this world. He has done his worst, but the wound will end him. He is hasped and hooped and hair-pinning in pain, limping and loping with it. Like a man outlawed for wickedness, he must await the mighty judgment of God and majesty. There was less tampering and big talk then from Unferth the boaster, less of his blather, and the hall things eyed the awful proof of the hero's prowess. The splayed hand up under the eaves, every nail, claw, scale, and spur, every spike and welt on the hand of that heathen brute was like barbed steel. Everybody said there was no honed iron hard enough to pierce him through, no time-proof blade that could have cut his brutal, blood-caked claw. All right, so we've got a couple things here. Hrothgar arrives at his hall, and when he gets there, he makes the statement of, you have done what nobody else could do. We have suffered long and hard under Grendel. For what reason we have been cursed with this, we don't know, but we have suffered through it. And he speaks as a king and a leader of his people, a king that was unable to stop what was happening, a king who was defenseless in protecting his men and the lands of his men and the treasures of his men and the families of his men. And I don't think enough attention gets paid to that. And the reason I say that is because we are told over and over and over and over again up until this point, Hrothgar is a good king. His men were less in number, but he was still king. There are, stories of kings being sacrificed for fields not producing. They would sacrifice their king for that. So this tells you how loyal the people were to this particular man. And for what reason was that? Why was he a good king? And he tells us in here, I reciprocate what you give me. You give me your fealty and your loyalty. You fight for me and you die for me, and I take care of you. He is still unable to defend all of these people against Grendel, yet still they stay. And why? If he was any lesser of a leader, they would not have stayed with him, because he is breaking his bond to his people by not being able to protect them. So that's one thing to consider about the greatness of Hrothgar before Grendel and during Grendel, is even though he could not protect them, they stayed by his side, because of the other things that he was able to provide for them. And it's important to note the strain that was on him as a leader, as a king. And I don't think that gets stressed enough, is the sorrow that is felt by him. And we see that sorrow coming back up here in a little bit. But the intense sorrow and pain that is felt by a king when they cannot protect their people. So that's one thing I would like to know if the Alshira Gothi would like to talk about, is that pain that he has that nobody sees. Our narrator tells us about it and he hints about it, but you don't see it manifested in the way he rolls. And I think you're muted, sir.
I don't think so. There we go. So Nick had muted me. I mentioned this on the last stanza, but even though this is epic poetry, it adds in elements of reality. Life happens, and if you're just inventing a story, you can make it to where the good guys always win and the bad guys always lose, and right is always vindicated and all of these things. And the real world doesn't always work that way. You can be the best king in the world and not win, and be faced with overwhelming odds that are beyond your power to confront. And that's one of the things, is Hrothgar does his best to keep the courtly vision of how things ought to be alive as best as he can. They celebrate, they lavish their gifts upon the heroes and upon their guests. They go through the motions of feasting and doing what one ought to do in a hall, and of existing in the regality that he ought to exist in, even when things are crumbling around him, when he's beset by, terror at every nightfall. Keeping up appearances is really important, and it's not about dishonesty. It's about keeping your head up. You owe it to your men not to be pouty and not to look weak. They're not stupid, but even when you're on the losing end, even in defeat, to carry yourself with a dignity that doesn't make them question, why have we served this man? Like, look at this weak, quivering, like, pile in front of us. We're fixing to die for this guy, and we made a bad choice. No, you owe it to them to be, as best you can, to be the man that they swore oaths to, and up until the point in which you're done. And that's that dignity is crucial, and we see that here, and it really is kind of the pieces like that, I think, are more important to me, and we'll see more of this in part 3. But those moments of frailty and things not working how they're supposed to are more informative to me in this work than the feats of great heroism. As amazing as those are, we get that and we celebrate that. People don't think about the quiet pain of being powerless. And that's the thing. We come to find out this monster's impervious to steel. You could have been the greatest swordsman in the world, and no sword would have penetrated this guy. No amount of battle prowess would have done that. Just strength of muscle versus muscle was the only way that was gonna do this. And they didn't know that till the end. So some of the tragic elements of this, I think, teach us a lot as well.
One of the things that we see in Beowulf, what Beowulf says as well, is, I would have liked it a lot better if you could have seen his whole body here, but rest assured he's gone. But one of the things that he hints at here is that even Beowulf being the biggest and the strongest and the most noble and the best that there is, even he has moments where he's not strong enough. He was strong enough to kill Grendel by ripping his entire shoulder from his body and dealing him a mortal wound. But again, weird will as weird will. Fate will what it wants. And no matter how strong you are, there are times when you are going to have to take the consolation prize. But you do it with a big trophy, even if you do. So that's one thing on there, is the humility that he states, that I wasn't strong enough to do it this way, but I still got the job done. So that's something that I've always liked in that part as well. He's like, I still won. It was a little bit messy, but I still did it. I got the job done either way. And you're going to notice that Unferth shows up in again. And I love to hate Unferth, but it even states in here, he was calling out Beowulf before. And it says in here, there was less tempering and big talk than from Unferth the boaster, less of his blather, and as the Hallthanes eyed the awful proof of what happened. There is no denying how amazing Beowulf was. There is no denying that Beowulf succeeded. There is no denying his courage or his strength. It's not just words. There is a huge arm, a huge trophy of mauled flesh and scales. Nobody can deny that happened. And it shuts him up immediately. Unferth did not have the courage to face Grendel. We know this because he's still alive. Yet he challenges the people who do. So when it comes down to it, here he sits, quieted. And what is the best way to quiet your enemies and those who tell you can't do something? Do it twice and take pictures. And that's exactly what Beowulf did. Anything to add on Unferth? Ashiragoli?
Yes, but it goes into one of the questions that's in the queue that we're going to end up answering later.
Okay.
So I'll get that when we get to it.
All right. Do we have any other questions in the queue we want to get to before we continue on?
You know what we want? I'm gonna get to it now because for reasons. Anyways, so being in someone's presence and looking them in the eye is crucial. through just the circumstances with which we live. So many of us miss out on that in a lot of our social interactions. And you notice with a lot of people, with people who tend to be reclusive and have their socialization on the internet, with younger people that grew up in a time where it was even more heavily loaded with that, the interaction of saying something to someone's face is really different. And I've said this a number of times as well. The idea that, well, that guy wouldn't say that to my face. If someone's heated, there's an implied threat there, but not really. Most of the time in the world we live in, there's probably not an immediate violent consequence to people saying rude or completely unfounded and inappropriate things. But there is a gut level instinctive consequence to looking foolish in public, to being aware that everybody looks at you like you're either the villain or you're a coward, or something that you say is completely inappropriate, or a way that you're behaving, having to deal with the looks of scorn of other people when you do that. Then there's another thing to be said when you are in the presence of greatness. There are people that, and there's all kind of hippie ways of describing it with auras and various other things, but it's absolutely real that there are people who have a presence that is greater than themselves. In our faith, there's different ways you can talk about that within the soul complex. I often like to refer to that as the woad self, but there is an image of yourself that projects beyond you, that people see and affects their vision of you. And that can be a number of different things, but it's sometimes when you see an old shriveled up man that is a hero, that you are aware of the life that they lived, you can't help but not see this broke down elderly person in front of you. You see a reflection of them in their prime, of their glory that they've achieved. There's something different that happens in moments. And I always talk about, and you guys may remember this, I always talk about the coolest thing as a Gothi is when we see in someone else's eyes when Asatru became real for them. And this is kind of what I mean about that presence. You can tell that that person is different than they were moments before. Something has happened there. Everything about them presents differently because they have awakened to our faith. And seeing that is special. You also see that when someone has been transformed through circumstance. We've talked a lot lately about the Einherjar and the idea of ascending and becoming something more than you are, and how heroes very often on the battlefield will achieve that state of being more, being superhuman, being the Ubermensch, maybe just for a moment, maybe for a small window, but touching their potential for a moment, being their woad self as opposed to being separate from it. You see that in a lot of those contexts. And I think that you see that here when Beowulf is standing draped in glory, beneath the dangling arm of his foe. His presence is overwhelming. I think his presence is overwhelming to everyone in the room, but to Unferth in a different way. He can't look Beowulf in the eye. And that is a very primal man-to-man reaction that you see there in a really special way.
Thank you, sir. All right, continuing on. Then the order was given for all of the hands to help to refurbish Shoutout immediately. Men and women thronging the wine hall, getting it ready. Gold threads shone in the wall hangings, woven scenes that attracted and held the eye's attention. But iron braced as the inside of it had been, the bright room lay in ruins now. The very doors had been dragged from their hinges, only the roof remained unscathed by the time the guilt-fouled fiend turned tail in despair for his life. But death is not easily escaped from by anyone. All of us souls, earth dwellers, and children of men must make our way to the destination already ordained, where the body, after banqueting, sleeps on his deathbed. Then the due time arrived for Halfdane's son to proceed to the hall. The king himself would sit down to feast. No group ever gathered in greater numbers or better order around the ring-giver. The benches filled with famous men who fell to with relish. Round upon round of mead was passed. Those powerful kinsmen, Hrothgar and Hrothulf, were in high spirits in the raftered hall. Inside Herod there was nothing but friendship. The shielding nation was not yet familiar with feud and betrayal. The Halfdane's son presented Beowulf with a gold standard as a victory gift, an embroidered banner, also breastmail and a helmet, and a sword carried high. There was both precious object and token of honor. So Beowulf drank his drink at ease. It was hardly ashamed to be showered with such gifts in front of the hall troops. There haven't been many moments, I am sure, when men exchanged for such treasures at so friendly a sitting. An embossed ridge, a band lapped with wire arched over the helmet, had protection to keep the keen ground cutting edge from damaging it when danger threatened, and the man that was battling behind his shield. Next, the king ordered 8 horses with gold bridles that he brought through the yard into the hall. The harness of one included a saddle of sumptuous design, the battle seat where the son of Halfdane rode where he wished to join the swordplay. Wherever the killing and carnage were the worst, he would be to the fore, fighting hard. Then the Danish prince, descendant of Ing, handed over both the arms and the horses, urging Beowulf to use them well. And so their leader, the Lord and guard and coffer and strong room, with customary grace bestowed upon Beowulf both sets of gifts. A fair witness can see how well each one behaved. Okay, so this is interesting for a couple different reasons, depending on what you're reading Beowulf for. So when I talked about Beowulf in the introduction, we talked about the people who took it at an academic stance and they only mined it for information, right? So this is a really good description. If you have a good imagination, this is a description of Anglo-Saxon armor and gold work and things like that. They're known for working beautifully with gold in their armor, in their helmets, and all of their things. So there's an example of that. But one of the things in here that I want to make point of is that it states again, when it's your time to go, it's your time to go. Do not fear your life, or do not fear your death, because your day of death is going to be there whether you like it or not. So do so with honor. But one of the things that they have in here as well, the ritual of gift giving itself. This is extraordinarily important throughout our culture, and it's important today. So when we look at it in an ancient versus a modern context, ancient context, the kings used to give jewels, horses, they would give women, they would give land, they would give all the things that it was theirs to give, right? In return for the loyalty and the service of the men. And almost all of these things are given here. Like we have horses being given, saddles being given, weapons and shields being given, and they're explained in detail. But the ritual of the gift giving itself, just think of how important that itself is, right? Our main ritual that we do is a gift between us and the gods. We gift each other. We gift each other for service, for loyalty, for frith. We gift ourselves to be of service and to service. So kings did not just give gifts to the people also gave gifts to the king. So that gift cycle is present not only between us and the gods, but between us and our king and between us as people. So think of the gift giving itself as a ritual, because it really truly is. So do you have anything to add on that part with the gift giving?
We talk about that all the time on this program, about the gift cycle. This is that in a human sense, and it is more tangible in a king and retainer situation than it is in a gods and folk situation. Um, the gods bless us with gifts, but it's not like we sit down, at a feast and stuff just magically starts appearing around us. It functions in a much more subtle way, and we give gifts to the gods. But again, as I've said many times, they don't really drink our meat or really eat, the meat of the sacrifice. The exchange is much more on a metaphysical plane that you don't see. But you see it here because gods give what gods give. Men give to the gods their worship, they give loyalty, they give things. But a king and his retainers, what resources does a king have? And he may give a favor down the line. He may give royal preference to something or something that is a little bit more esoteric. But what the king has is resources. And you'll see in the exchange, it's never an even exchange. And we like to think that it is, but it's in proportion to the people giving. Hrothgar in the story is this, great king. It's told in a really interesting way because he's this great king that's got all these horses and gold and, gold weaponry and golden banner and all this stuff. But his kingdom seems to exist of one hall with one war band of like 12 guys. So it's told strange in that way. But, a small war leader may not have that. He may have, an extra portion of the crops or an extra proportion of the spoils that he can give. He can give you a bigger cut of, war spoils. If he has lands to dispose of, he can give you lands. He can give you, whatever the case might be at the time. But the idea is the king gives you gifts befitting a king. And, the person of more humbler means gives what he can. And sometimes that's a song. Sometimes that's a poem. Sometimes that's a token of their loyalty. Oftentimes it's a showing of loyalty. It's taking a knee. It's pledging to be that king's man and to have that king's back and to provide for that king and have that loyalty. People of very little means, they give what they have to give. And the king with his luxury and his spoils, yes, you want your king to be laid, just weighed down with gold and jewels and magnificence, because like I said earlier, he symbolizes your folk. He's your living idol of the glory of your nation, the glory of your war band. You want to adorn him with all those things. But one of the other reasons that for kings to have immense riches is for them to be able to distribute those as reward to people who've served them well. But the gift cycle that bonds us together in Sumbul, the gift cycle that bonds us and our gods, the gift cycle that builds relationship through friendship is very much the gift cycle that goes on in the hall of our ancestors. It becomes much more formalized when done from retainer to king, but the principle remains, and it's what ties this community together with bonds of loyalty based on it.
So we do have a question in the chat as well from Robert E. Boy Lee. And it says, good evening, how are y'all doing? Also, what has been the greatest battle you have fought, physical or otherwise, and did you rip your opponent's arm off? Kalshir Godi, have you ever ripped off an arm?
So I ripped off a leg one time. All right, two stories. One humorous, the other not so much. So I was a bouncer at a bar in St. Augustine, Florida, and back for a while there, and I don't know if they still do this, but especially when Pirates of the Caribbean was a big thing, there was a whole lot of pirate dress up. There'd be guys in pirate dress up that lead tours down there for the tourists. There'd be pirate pub crawl things. One such piratey occasion, a piratey gentleman walked in with a painted on eye patch, which was humorous. And fine, he came in, had some drinks with his buddy, whatever. Well, when it's time to go, a lot of patrons of bars think that, well, they can stay as long as there's a drink in front of them, and there's no time for them to go. Like, we can stop serving them, but they get to sit there and nurse the remnants of their drink for eternity. City legislatures, though, they're unaware of this rule. So they enforce things like you have to have the customers out and not consuming alcohol at a certain point, or your liquor license is at risk. So it was often my job to, hasten people. Hey man, time to go. Gotta go. Night's over. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good night. All right, man, drink up. Time to go. And you can only do it so many times. So I went to this table and told the guy, hey, it's time to go. And then went to the other tables and started clearing them out and came and checked back and be like, all right, man, come on. It's the third time, finish your drink. Gotta go. Went to some more tables. And this is the last table and everybody's gone. We're all cleaning up around him. We're starting to come up on that hard deadline that he's got to be out. So physics work different in the reality that he lives in also. So he did this thing where I'm at some point, hey, it is time to go. Please leave your drink and leave. No, I'm not leaving as long as there's booze in this glass. So I grabbed the glass and he's grabbing the glass and he's trying to play tug of war with me with the glass. I don't care about the glass. I care that there's liquid in it. So I just turn my wrist and all his drink pours out because it's an outdoor place. It's on a patio. It doesn't matter. He was very unhappy. I'm like, hey, it's time to go. And he's like, I'm not leaving. I said, yes, you are. So I went around and I grabbed him and he grabs the table and holds on for dear life. And so I pry this little man from the table and I'm carrying him out and his little legs are kicking as I'm taking him out. And he starts trying to hook his legs on the other tables as I'm pulling him out of the bar. He hooks one of his legs. I continue to drag him from the bar and the leg pops off. I was unaware that this man was a one-legged man. So I set him down on the sidewalk, went back in, I got his leg and I brought it to him. And he was not happy about the situation. I went back in the bar and the bartender, he had a couple girls in there that he was talking to, but he was trying to get them out too. And I walked in there and he's like, oh, Matt just ripped that guy's leg off. Girls, you got to go. Matt's going to rip your leg off. I've seen it. And I was like, I didn't know he only had one leg. And he looked at me and he said, dude was dressed like a pirate. And you didn't think he had a peg leg? And I didn't have a response. So that happened. On a serious note, there was, okay, it's funny. These are the stories that I have. I am not trying to claim that I'm this super awesome badass or that bouncing is equivalent to great deeds on the battlefield. It's not, but it's what I have as a reference. The question was asked. So this is what I got. So I'm trying to think. No, at the time I wasn't running security. I eventually ran security there, but I was, just one of the guys on the team at this time. We had a crew of like 13 guys. And one night in the summertime in Anchorage, Alaska, at this bar that I bounced at, that was kind of the biggest deal in town. So it got a lot of people at it. We were at capacity that night. But the most dangerous thing in that kind of environment is the parking lot, because you never know what people have in the parking lot. In the bar is a controlled environment. You can check people at the door. You're aware of what people have access to and the surroundings. In the parking lot, there's a lot of X factors. So this is Started out night like any other, but we filled up and we were at capacity. And capacity there was like 999. So it was 1,000 people capacity. We're at capacity, and we had, the way it was laid out, it was 3 main dance floors that were connected in this bar that looks like you just built it. And I mean, that's basically what happened. You built it over the course of like 50 years, adding on different little pieces to it. It was kind of cobblestone together, and it looked like a log cabin on the outside. So on one end, there was a hip hop area that was mostly Asians and Pacific Islanders. In the middle, you'd have military guys. It would be largely white, and they'd have like usually a rock cover band. And then on the other side, you'd have a hip hop area that was mostly blacks and some Hispanics. And the hip hop sections would mix back and forth when the DJ would do something they don't like or whatever, but they'd go through the middle. And so you'd have these different, or the band in the middle would go on a break, and then those guys would go over. And so you had a lot of these different groups of people colliding with one another. Over in the largely black and Hispanic hip hop section, a fight breaks out. We get calls on our radio. We go over there, and it's one of those like we're physically dragging people and chucking them out the door kind of fights. And there was, 10 people involved. So we're, grabbing a guy, chucking him out the door, grabbing the next guy, chucking him out the door, doing that for these people. The next thing you know, they're fighting in the parking lot. So then we got to go out to the parking lot. So when we're in the parking lot trying to break up fights that are happening there, and then we get calls, no, back quick, negative door on the south side, fight. So we go over there and we come back in. Their friends have started fighting inside. So, and the more this happens, there's 3 rounds of us doing this, chucking them outside, coming back in, then having to follow the fight outside. It became like, and this was the most like this that ever happened in real life, but it became like one of those movie bar fights where everybody bumps into each other and everybody's just fighting everybody else. When it got that way, we turned on all the lights and just everybody out, closing early, got to go. But it starts getting crazy in the parking lot. What happens is everyone in the parking lot starts calling their homies to come, regulate. So the parking lot fills up with, and it's largely the hip hop community engaged in this fight. So everyone who would find themselves in that community gathers in our parking lot. So at this point, there's probably 2,000 people in the parking lot or bar area. And there's 13 of us out there trying to keep the non-combatants safe in this crazy melee that we're out there. So we're out there, and the cops have gotten calls, and they're showing up. They form a riot line at the edges of our parking lot. They have riot shields, and they have loudspeakers. And they're like, "This is an unlawful assembly. Please disperse." But they won't enter the parking lot. Like, they don't know what to do. This is crazy. And it erupted out of nowhere, and they won't enter. And they're, riot armored, and, all of them got guns and got cop things. We're going out there, and basically our bouncer uniform was the shirt that I'm wearing now with a black vest, with like a cloth black vest. Some of us, especially when we'd go out at night, would wear Kevlar underneath because there's often shots fired in that parking lot. In the summertime, it's hot, so you kind of it's hit or miss. No pun intended. So we went out there, and the cops refused to help us. There was 13 of us, so we just wait in the middle of it and start dealing with stuff. And people are coming at us, and we are laying people out. And one of the guys that I was there with, it was my partner in some of this, he had an expandable baton, and we're just doing what we can, having each other's back, and we're going through and eliminating threats that are in the parking lot. And So we're fighting, we're in the thick of it, and a moment starts to happen where everything works. We don't know why. It's not because any of us are ninjas. Everything works. Everything they do misses. Everything we do is beautiful, and they're getting laid out. And I remember right where I was. I could walk there to this day. Literally, there's 3 or 4 hip hop gentlemen in front of me on the ground, hopefully learning lessons. And at some point, the wave stops coming. There's nobody else around. And I bump into something, and I turn around to engage, and he turns around, and it's me and my buddy, and everybody else is done. And all of my guys, it is brutal because we're wearing white dress shirts. It's red up to the shoulder on both arms. But we check, and it's not ours. And everybody, all of my guys are fine. And we walked in, we had some free pizza, and it was a good night. But this is the story I was talking about a second ago, that with Unferth, when we walked back in after we cleared the parking lot ourselves, the riot line of police could not look at us. And it was very awkward because they're the same people that work that shift that would very often give us a hard time. They could not look us in the eye. And for an hour there, we were transformed. And it was that's the best I've got on something remotely similar.
It's a really good story, sir. And I'm pretty sure that this particular episode is going to go down in history for the peg leg story. I mean, Beowulf ripped off an arm, but you ripped off a leg. So in turn, sir, you are as epic as Beowulf.
Somebody else got there before me and ripped off the leg. I ripped off the replacement.
All right, you got one more question before we move on to the next section. Lydia asked, the king gives gifts befitting a king. How can we take this principle into the modern day? Would you like to talk about some of the things that the AFA does for outstanding leadership or gifts or things of that nature?
So that's interesting. I am in a spot where I forget that I have this robot camera. And so sometimes it changes my camera view. And I noticed that, stop it, robot camera. Hold on. It's a really cool camera. It's just poor management by the owner of said camera. I am in a spot where I am a sovereign, but I do not have mountains of booty to distribute. The nature of our church doesn't work that way. And just because of the modern situation and modern economy of things, we have a lot of other things to do with the stuff that we have than to provide Matt with riches, despite some rumors that you might hear floating around. That said, we talk in leadership a little bit about what things we have to help reward people on things. And we've got enough funds that we can do nice things. But we often will reward people with positions, with opportunity, with tokens of our appreciation on stuff, with plaques, with names on plaques of things. when someone is ordained as a Gothi or Githia, they get a ring. When somebody is a very special long-term member of making the AFA happen, they get an AFA honor ring. Couple reasons. Rings are cool. It's a cool thing, but hearkening back to our lore and our tradition, it's one of my jobs as the sovereign of the AFA to be a ring giver, figuratively and literally. But finding ways to honor our heroes and people who do great things in the AFA is always an interesting challenge, because we don't have the wealth and abundance to give them teams of horses and golden armor and things of that nature. But we try to find small tokens that are meaningful to give as gifts. Sometimes we'll fly people out to an event if they're leaders that have done an amazing job, and it's dual purpose. Some of that's a reward, but most of the rewards within the AFA, and I was talking to Witan Young about that earlier, whereas a lot of people view them as they think of their rewards sometimes as a hardship, like, oh, they're forcing you to go on this work trip. No, to most of us, that's, some of our favorite time. I talked to someone at Feast of the Einherjar, and they were thanking me for, going all that distance or whatever. And I'm sitting there, man, I'm lucky I get to travel all over and do all these cool AFA things and be with my folk all this time. And, how fortunate I am that I'm able to do that. So a lot of our rewards for my Thanes when they do great things is giving them more AFA things to do and more AFA responsibilities to take more time away from their families and personal lives to do. But we're working on that, on ways to properly gift people that achieve a lot for us and that do great things for us.
Thank you, sir. All right, going on to our next part here. The chieftain went on to reward the others. Each man on the bench who had sailed with Beowulf and risked a voyage received a bounty. Some treasured possession, and compensation of price in gold was settled for the Geat Grendel had cruelly killed earlier, as he would have killed more had not mindful God and one man's daring prevented that doom. Past and present, God's will prevails. Hence, understanding is always best and a prudent mind. Whoever remains for long here in this earthly life will enjoy and endure more than enough. They sang then and played to please the hero, words and music for their warrior prince, harp tunes and tales of adventure. There were high times on the wall benches, and the king's poet performed the part with the saga of Finn and his sons, unfolding the tale of the fierce attack in Friesland where Naf, the king of the Danes, met death. Hidelberd had little cause to credit the Jude's son and brother. She lost them both on the battlefield. She, bereft and blameless, they foredoomed, cut down the spear gourd. She, the woman in shock, waylaid by grief. Was daughter, how could she not lament her fate when morning came and the light broke on her murdered dears? And so farewell delight on earth was carried away, Finn's troop of thanes, all but a few. How then could Finn hold the line or fight on the end with Hengist, who saved the rump of his force from the enemy chief? So a truce was offered as follows. First, separate quarters to be cleared for the Danes, hall and throne to be shared with the Frisians. Then, second, every day as a dole out of gifts, Fenn, son of Folkwald, should honor the Danes, bestow with an even hand to Hengist and Hengist men, and wrought gold rings, bounty to match the measure he gave his own Frisians, to keep morale in the beer hall high. Both sides then sealed their agreement. With oaths to Hengist, Fenn swore openly, solemnly, that the battle survivors would be guaranteed honor and status. No infringement by word or deed, no provocation would be permitted. Their own ring giver, after all, was dead and gone. They were leaderless, and forced allegiance to his murderer. So if any Frisian stirred up bad blood with insinuations or taunts about this, the blade of the sword would arbitrate it. A funeral pyre was then prepared. Evelgent gold brought out from the hoard. The pride of the Prince of the Schildians lay awaiting the flame. Everywhere there were blood-plastered coats of mail. The pyre was heaped with the boar-shaped helmets, forged in gold with the gashed corpses of well-born Danes. Many had fallen. Then Hildebert ordered her own son's body be burnt with nafs, the flesh of his bones to sputter and blaze beside his uncle's. The woman wailed and sang kings. The warrior went up. Carcass flames swirled and fumed, and stood round the brutal mound and howled as heads melted. Crushed gashes spattered and ran bloody matter. The glutton element flamed, consumed the dead of both sides. Their great days were gone. All right, so we've got a little bit for everybody on this one. So if you're into the funeral rites, it's in there. One of the things that I want to focus on this one is the mother who lost her family, right? One of the things that you'll find in epic literature as well as in the sagas is a lot of the time the women will be either act as solid counsel or they act as a cattle prod. And you'll see that more as we get into when the queen comes through as well. There are a lot of things that men will fight and die for. That'll be country, cause, their folk. But oftentimes a woman will settle a lot of things. A woman's heartbreak or a agreement with a woman or any of those things. Men will fight for women, but men will also be peaceful for women. And they will find a way to make that happen. That is one of our roles. So remember that we can lead the men to go to war, but we can also lead them to peace. And on this one here, when they're talking about when the war was over, and the Ashiragodi mentioned it earlier, you can rally for a king even if the king is an old man, as long as he's in the front. But when the Lord is dead, sometimes you don't have anything else to fight for. And you find yourself in a situation where you have to coexist at a minimum. Do you have any thoughts on that, sir? In particular?
Say your last statement again one more time, because I don't want to get something wrong.
So when you lose a leader, or you lose someone that is the head of the cause, or you are just defeated in general, there are times when you have to find a way to coexist. And you have to have that grit. Otherwise, it is just an endless battle of death and despair, when the battle itself was hard enough as it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I wanted to comment on a couple of things. First, I wanted to reiterate that's one of the this whole poem is like this. It's just rich with things about how to behave. The epic lore of the Eddas is everybody's go-to, but it doesn't teach the same. Like, what do you do with that? How do you behave with the ethics of Asatru? And this poem does. Women being frith weavers is essential to women's proper social function. There's lots of things that women do that are women's specialties, and the more that we move our women away from those or we lessen the value of those, we rob our women of success and their natural strengths and glories in life. One of the biggest of those is they are able to settle disputes and to calm things. And I think that we've all been in those situations. We've seen it go the other way, They can absolutely stir two men who would never ever fight one another into a heated fist fight by choosing to make that happen. I've gotten a fight with a number of guys bouncing to where, because they're girls behind them, they literally mouth to me, "I'm sorry, I don't want to do this," because they got put on the spot and they got made to look weak and like, "Are you going to take that? Are you going to let him talk to you like that?" And like, and that's a thing. But the inverse is also equally true. Putting a hand on somebody's arm and asking them not to fight there, or asking them to take you home, or like, "Hey, how about you dance with me instead? Let's go dance." Doing those things, sometimes very, very subtle, de-escalate a situation very, very well. And that's an important skill that is in short supply amongst our women these days, unfortunately. The idea of when the king falls, everybody just kind of stops and goes, collects their dead, and everybody goes home, is a very important concept on things. And we see this displayed in different ways. I think we need to look at the things that our ancestors did that were celebrated and look at the things they did that were the subject of hardship and tragedy. We don't want to ape how our ancestors lived. How they lived is irrelevant. The thought of the values that they lived for and what they chose to value and chose to not value are extremely relevant. The individual actions are contextual. What we see is finding resolution is valuable. If you can get awesome vengeance and come out on top, that's also valuable. If two families or two groups of people are involved in a generations long blood feud, that is a tragedy. Now, there are principles of honor that go into sometimes making that a necessity, but it's tragic, and finding ways to avoid that is one of the themes that our ancestors placed great value in. And this goes into, and we talked a little bit about on the episode with Tyr as the war god, but when two kings take the field, a metaphysical struggle goes on. When one of those kings falls, the issue's kind of been decided. You don't have to like it, but you stop needlessly throwing life on it. And that's a hard thing, but it's a really important thing. And we see that a lot. We especially see that in antiquity and through the Middle Ages. When the king goes down, everybody just kind of figures that it's done. Put down your weapons. We'll call it good. People go home who are going to go home, or we're going to take you prisoner, or whatever the deal is. But battle's over at that point a lot. Things in the age of kings and war chiefs were very often personal, in the sense that they were related to that king's claim on things, to that king's rights being enforced or not. When that king falls, it's a very natural end to, all right, every last person doesn't need to sacrifice their life. And that idea has saved a lot of lives.
We do have a question in the chat we might want to get to too before we get too much further. As True Text has asked, here's a question for y'all. Would it be inappropriate to hold a blow to Sleipnir? He is technically offspring of Loki, but he is also a boon to the Allfather Odin.
Yeah, he's a horse. Like, And I've seen the other things, and it's strange because his siblings have different levels of sentience and personness. We have zero indication in the lore that Sleipnir is capable of exchanging in the gift cycle in a way outside of what a regular horse would be able to exchange in. That's so the issue is, well, should we not do it because he's an offspring of Loki? No, I don't think that's the reason that we shouldn't. In that way, the same way that we've talked about various giantesses being welcomed into and amongst the Aesir, he's clearly welcomed to and, on Team Aesir as Odin's steed. But he's a horse. We have no reason that he's sentient. He's not a talking horse that engage, and I'm not being silly because we do get the impression that Jormungand and that Fenrir are malevolent, that they have intent, that they have thought to do evil, to do chaos. We're given that impression. We aren't given that impression of personality about Sleipnir. Now, that said, I've mentioned before, leaving out an offering for or giving a nod to, I don't think is inappropriate. Hosting a big bloat for would seem very out of place. And that may seem like a subtle distinction, but I mentioned the silly little first offering I did to Freya when I first became Asatru. And it was meant well. It's not what I recommend, but it was what I had. And I left her a shot of Goldschlager and some fancy feast because she had cats. And that's all I knew at that point. Something like that makes sense, a tradition that I used to do. And, maybe me and Aubrey will do this year is at Mother's Night, leaving out an apple or some carrots, by the street because, the wild hunt's coming through and Odin's riding Sleipnir through, making a little offering as a nod to that is a nice gesture. But as far as we know, he's a horse, magical horse. He's the best of horses, I think he's described as. But we have no reason to think of him as being a god or a hero or something that has got the sentience that you give bloat to him. He's a horse.
All right, on to more Beowulf. Warriors scattered to homes and forts all over Friesland. Fewer now are feeling loss of friends. Hengist stayed, lived out the whole resentful, blood-sullen winter with Finn, homesick and helpless. No ring-whirled plow could up then and away on the sea. Wind and water raged with storms. Wave and shingle were shackled in ice until another year appeared in the yard, as it does to this day. In the seasons constant, the wonder of light coming over us. The winter was gone, Earth's lap grew lovely, longing woke in a cooped-up exile for a voyage home. But more for vengeance, some way of bringing things to a head. His sword arm hankered to greet the Utes. He didn't greet the Utes. He did not balk once. Halfling placed on his lap, dazzled the duel, and the best sword of all, whose edges he know only too well. Thus blood was spilled, the gallant Finn, slain in his home after Beowulf and Oslaf, back from the voyage, made old accusation. The brutal ambush, the fate they had suffered, all blamed on Finn. The wildness in them had to brim over. The hall ran red with blood of enemies. Finn was cut down. The queen brought away, and everything the Shieldings could find inside Finn's walls. Frisian keys, gold collars, and gemstones swept off to the ship. Over the sea lanes, 10 back to the Daneland, and warrior troop bore the lady home. The poem was over. The poet had performed. A pleasant murmur started from the benches. Stewards did the rounds, and with wine in splendid jugs. And Wethlau came to sit in her gold crown between two good men, uncle and nephew. each of whom still trusted the other, and the forthright Unferth, admired by all for his might and courage, although under a cloud for killing his brothers, reclined near the king. The queen spoke. Enjoy this drink, my most generous lord. Raise up your goblet, entertain the Geats. Duly and gently discourse them. Be open-handed, happy, and fond. Relish their company, but recollect as well all of the boons that have been bestowed on you. The bright court of Herat has been cleansed, and now the word is that you want to adopt this warrior as a son. So while you may bask in your fortune, and then bequeath kingdom and nation to your kith and kin before our decease. I am certain of Hrothulf. He is noble and will use the young ones well. He will not let you down, should you die before him. He will treat our children truly and fairly. He will honor, I am sure, our 2 sons. Repay them in kind when he recollects all of the good things we gave him once, the favor and respect he found in his childhood. She turned then to the bench where her boys sat, Hrethik and Hrothmund, with other noble sons, all the youth together, and that good man, Beowulf the Geat, sat between the brothers. Okay, so I've got a couple things to say about this, but the first thing I want to say is, when we're talking about Finn being cut down, it doesn't matter. What's the best way of saying that? Even if you're a conqueror, and even if you try to do the best you can for peace, there are always going to be those that can't live in peace. There are always going to be those who cannot live with defeat. There are always going to be those that, no matter what the oaths were made, they will break the oath for personal glory rather than for the betterment of the community. And we see that in modern times as well, where an oath doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who made the oath. It doesn't matter if you were part of the oath. It doesn't matter if you made the oath. You did that in a moment, and then when your own emotion and your own ego and things that are more important to you come up, no matter what the consequences are on the community, you'll break that oath for yourself. We see that today, and we saw that with our ancestors. And it's pointed out in here that the community is what matters. The community is what needs to be taken care of. Your own thirst for revenge can tear an entire community apart. So I just wanted to point that out in there. That's a old context, and it's a modern context as well. We see that over and over again, and it's pointed out that you're not just harming your own honor when you do that. You're harming the honor of everyone else around you as well. Alshira, do you have anything to add on that in particular?
Well, so on that and a little bit on the on the side chat going on a little bit, we have a warped concept of honor that's come down to us. Honor, in our ancestors' time, the concept of honor wasn't your personal code of you're not to be messed with. That's not what it meant. It had very much the sense that we still have today when we're being formal and someone receives an honor. It was a value that was placed on you by society. You behaving in a way that we typically today would talk about honor evolved the way it has because that kind of behavior built reputation and value for you in the community. Building reputation and maintaining your reputation was a reference to honor because it was about your social stake that you had. One of the issues with oaths, when one broke an oath in our ancestors' time, they were known as an oath breaker. Their kin were known as kin of an oath breaker. It affected their honor and the honor of their family and the honor of people who had associations with them. And there was a social consequence for you breaking your word and not being trustworthy. In today, we don't have that social reinforcement. People don't take oaths seriously. Most people talk such a huge game, and I see people use oaths as a convenient excuse to misbehave or to not do things. But those same people never find oaths binding if they have an ounce of butthurt about anything ever. All of a sudden, oath? What oath? What are you talking about? And we see it, in my time in Asatru, I have seen a lot more examples of oath breaking than I have of oath fulfillment, unfortunately. And part of that is we are so soft, and we talk about this in terms of courage and cowardice. If I get on here and call out people for being cowards, immediately I'm a mean bully, and people don't find that tasteful. The same people want me to celebrate heroes. You can't do one without the other. It's like on oaths, we make this big to do about how special they are. But when you start calling out oath breakers for breaking oaths, in our ancestors' time, that would mean people put a lot of social pressure on them. In this time, you're a bully for having the audacity to mention their oath breaking. And that's got to correct itself to get to a point where we can restore some honor. The other thing I want to point out is, and I'm not following the conversation over on the side completely, but getting in stupid fights for your honor is outmoded a little bit because you're not building a reputation. Getting in relatively petty duels about honor in a time where that mattered a lot made sense because the cost benefit analysis was really different. If you were to duel people because they said something bad about you and get in fights, you were celebrated by your society, you were rewarded, you were treated well, and it brought your social value up. In today's world, if you do that, that is very often not the case. Yes, there are obviously some situations where a man's got to do what a man's got to do. But more often than not, what it does is give you a criminal record, make people think that you're a bully, limit your ability to provide for your family and be successful in life. That's not a net honor gain. It's a net honor loss for you as your family. You become a less productive member of society because you sacrifice 10 years of your life and lots of your freedoms to punch somebody in the nose that called you a name that you didn't like one time. So context is everything. If you did that in the Old West, you'd be a hero, you'd be awesome. If you did that last weekend, you'd be going for a judge. So it's a real different scenario. And I think those things need to be weighed before people make choices. That's what I got.
Thank you, sir. We go down after the tale is ended when he starts talking about this, the word that was had and the oaths that were made. And then we start talking about the hall itself. After the lay is over, we go back to the hall. And the queen is coming in and giving out drink, right? Making her rounds. But one of the things that she makes it a point is to stop by the king and say, I see that this great warrior is with us and that you intend to adopt him as your son. And that's all fine and good. We're okay with that. He's a great man. Don't forget your nephew, because our nephew has that familiar bond. He's going to treat our sons well. If something were to happen to us, I think that he's definitely going to be the one that you're going to want to take care of our kids. But there's something in here when you look at it, and in Brandyland Beowulf, when she looks across and it says in here, all of these noble children are sitting on the benches, and in between the brothers sits Beowulf. And she can look over and she sees Beowulf with her sons at her side. And it's a sign of nobility. It's a sign of showing worth that Beowulf, whether he has, and it doesn't say he has been adopted. It says, I choose to adopt you, right? You are a son in my heart. But you look over across at the bench and the two sons are sitting between Beowulf. So this giant of a man and these young nobles are all sitting together, but it shows you his rank and his worth at that hall. He's sitting with the princes of the hall. So when you look at the seating of a hall, people sit according to their rank and people are served according to their rank. So this is a big, huge thing for him to be sitting at this bench with these boys and for her to look over and see that between the two. So when we're talking about going to a hall and looking around and seeing who's there, you're looking to see who's there, where do you fit in? And sometimes that is, in a modern context, sometimes that can be kind of at an unconscious level. When you see the Alshira go sitting at a table, sometimes you might ask yourself, do I get to sit to his left or to his right? Do I approach this whole great big group of leadership or do I not post this great big group of leadership? So I'm just going to make it a point to throw this in here because it's a good spot to approach the Alshira Gothi at that table. Okay. Walk up to that entire group of leadership. When you see us all grouped together, or you see us sitting all together with Gothar and folk builders and things like that, I imagine as a member that might be a little bit intimidating to walk up to a table with the founder of your church and his wife, who is the most amazing Githia that's ever lived. And then you have the Alshira Gothi, who is like this great, strong, powerful leader of an amazing church with all of his Gothar and all of his folk builders. And you look at this table, which would be like the table of nobility in the hall. Walk up to that hall. So that's something that I want to put a similarity to, but also put a contrast to in ancient times versus modern times. There doesn't have to be a big ceremony all the time in modern times. There is a respect for the position that the Alshira Gothi holds, that the founder holds, that the Gothar holds, but they are not to the point where you have to not approach them. I don't want us to read this and read rank and think that we can't be approachable. Make sure that you go into that group of people. If you surround yourselves with noble people, it'll help raise your nobility. So do that. Insert yourself. Raise your nobility. Do you have anything to add about the passing
Yeah, I
out?
do. Context, as I've said 1,000 times, as I've said like 15 times tonight, context is everything. If we're all sitting around eating and it's just whatever, then you can have that conversation. People don't do that during Sumble because we're doing something that's very formalized. And things evolve over time. I don't think it's a attitude of stuffiness. There just is a certain amount of ceremony that goes on as things evolve and become bigger, and a certain amount of deference is nice. At the same point in time, both Steve and myself we genuinely want to talk to our folk, and we've asked for people to do that. We've expressed that we're super open for people to talk to us and we want that interaction. So, I mean, you'd be disobeying the will of your king if you did not come up and approach and do that. But what's important is being comfortable with frankness. Yes, go and approach people who are in positions. Dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Surround yourself with people who are closer to what you want to be or where you want to be, and be in their company if you're welcome. And don't get your feelings hurt if you're not. If you come up to them and they're doing something that's official and it's not the right time and place, it's not a slap in the face for things to get sorted out. Or if people, I've seen them at events, will set up the tables for special meals in a certain way to where maybe there's a high table to where myself and the Witan and the Gothar sit, and if some guy's just sitting there and we're getting ready to eat and somebody says, hey, we're going to need you to move, or this spot's reserved for these folks, don't get hurt and offended, because it's not a take an offense thing. And that's one of the biggest things I just would like to encourage everybody to do we need to be more comfortable with frankness and less quick to have butt hurt. That's one of the things about Frith and the Hall that's really important. It degraded over time as more foppishness and, I would argue more Christianity took over the court of kings. But in our tradition, frankness is really important, being able to speak openly. But it implies certain things. Your ability to speak openly, it goes hand in hand with your ability to accept things that are not your favorite with grace and without butthurt. We all who are listening to this know that our world would be a lot better if a lot of people were a lot less sensitive over little minutia and microaggressions. So re-embracing a frank discussion of who sits where, that's part of the hall culture. Is I often wonder how the seating was laid out. I think it was very obvious, and the ladies of the hall enforced it a lot on prescribed rank when there's kings and dukes and counts, and there's a structure. When it's the members of a war band, not as much. I think there's probably a feeling out process of who sat where and whether you get to sit there without somebody saying, hey, that's my spot, get up. Having those conversations is healthy, and it's especially healthy amongst men. It's really important that we respond to those in a healthy way instead of taking a frank assessment of ourselves as being meant as an insult.
All right, we're going to try to get to the next couple sections here, and then we've got some questions that are stacking up. All right. The cup was carried to him, kind words spoken and welcome, and the wealth of the wrought gold graciously bestowed, 2 arm bangles, a mail shirt and rings, and the most resplendent torque of gold I had ever heard tell of anywhere on earth or under heaven. There was no hoard like it since Hamas snatched the Brosen's neck chain and bore it away, with its gems and setting into a shining fort, away from Emeric's wiles and hatred, and thereby ensured his eternal reward. Highlight the Geat, grandson of Swearing, wore this neck ring on his last raid at bay under his banner. He defended the booty treasure he had won. Fate swept him away because of his proud need to provoke a feud with the Frisians. He fell beneath the shield in the same gem-crusted kingly gear he had worn when he had crossed the frothing wave vat. So the dead king fell into Frankish hands. They took his breastmail, also with his neck torque, and the Punier warriors plundered the slain. When the carnage ended, Geat corpses covered the field. Applause filled the hall. Then Wethel pronounced in the presence of the company, take delight in this torque, dear Beowulf, wear it for luck, and wear it for also this mail from our people's armory. May you prosper in them. Be acclaimed for strength, for kindly guidance. To these 2 boys, and your bounty will be sure. You have won renown. You are known for all men, far and near, now and forever. Your sway is wide as the wind's home, as the sea around cliffs. And so, my prince, I wish you a lifetime's luck and blessings to enjoy this treasure. Treat my sons with tender care, be strong and kind. Here each comrade is true to the other, loyal to the Lord, loving in spirit. The thanes have on purpose, the people are ready. Having drunk and pledged, the ranks do as I bid. She moved then to her place. Men were drinking wine at the rare feast. How could they know fate, the grim shape of things to come, the threat looming over many thanes? As night approached, the King Hrothgar prepared to retire to his quarters. Retainers in great numbers were posted on guard, as so often in the past. Benches were pushed back, bedding gear and bolsters spread across the floor, and one man lay down to his rest, already marked for death. As their heads they placed their polished timber battle shields, and on the bench above them each man kid was kept in hand, a towering war helmet, webbed mail shirt, and great shafted spear. It was their habit always and everywhere to be ready for action, at home or in the camp, in whatever case and whatever time they need arose, to rally around their lord. They were a bright people. All right, so we have Wethlau coming through and giving out gifts, a torque and a shield from the armory of their family, and says, may they guide you, and may it give you luck, and may it give you honor. But you can tell exactly what it is that is on a woman's mind that's a little bit different than the king's. When she talks about all these things, may you take delight, may you take honor in this. If the care of my sons is your priority, if you are true to my children, I am giving these things to you, and I am telling you in my speech that I expect your loyalty to my children. So that is where her priority is. She talked also about it in the previous fit when she says, your nephew would do well because he is closer to our sons than Beowulf is. And now she reiterates it to Beowulf as well. My children are my priority. My children are the future. Tend them well, and honor is going to be yours. We are giving you these gifts. I'm telling you as a woman, this is what I expect in return. So the whole idea that women in this time and space are docile and they are only there to literally hold the cup and walk it around is not true. They influence politics and they influence the leaders with the things that they say and the actions that they have. They are very blunt to make sure that their family and their children are first and foremost taken care of, that their interests are being taken care of. So the docile woman just handing out meat and smiling with nothing to say is not correct. Alshira, anything to add on that? I think you're muted.
Yep. Funny, when you said that, I said, I'm waiting for Nick to take the mute thing off. Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think that the young women absolutely are, because they don't have the interest or the gravitas to make that effective. But specifically, you see noble women having having that, and you see it a lot with queens. The women in hall culture and in a large part today do a whole lot to set the pecking order. And you can see this. I've mentioned this a lot. If you're in a room full of mixed company, and all of the women, the guys that the women show the attention to helps sort out the social status of the people in the room. Some of that is the natural magnetism of the men, but a lot of that is the intentional, where women want to put that emphasis. And in the chaotic world of today, it gets morphed into a lot of different things. But the more structured the society is, the more the women flex their subtle arts of social manipulation. Manipulation isn't a bad word. You can manipulate things maliciously or in a way that's dishonorable, but there's plenty of completely respectable ways to manipulate the situation. And I think that we've got it in our lexicon as a negative word when it's not. But specifically, women determine the man with the most clout in the room often. And when you deal in a situation like this, especially with an aging monarch, the women have a lot to do with the succession and how that works, and they have a lot at stake. Very often, the queen's value is they're the queen, and then they're the mother of the next king. It's their job to make sure that works, because if it doesn't and their kids get pushed aside, they're very quickly thrown in the dust heap. And that's suboptimal. So figuring that and using the powers that they have while they have them to ensure that their children are well taken care of, and to get oaths and agreements in public to that effect, are very, very valuable, because it's real easy, after the king dies, if you're a celebrity and you're awesome and you're prominent and you have a lot of power behind you, for the princes to just go hunting with you and disappear one day. And we don't talk about them anymore. I don't know. But that happened a lot. So that's very much a thing, to do that publicly, to do that in the sight of the court and in the sight of the gods in a ritual place is really important to secure those things and to secure the next relationship. Very often the queen would go and would then become the queen of the next king, depending in a more elective warband. You see this you read a lot about this in The Lady with the Mead Cup. I talk a lot about how it's very redundant. This is one of the 3 or 4 points that it says 17 times. But yeah, the man that the former queen chooses to be, the guy she's going to put attention on, is a huge factor in their ability to take control of that leaderless warband or not. Once it's more formalized in a hereditary monarchy, her securing position for her sons is extremely important. And if not, her, maybe becoming the queen of the next king is really important too, if she wants to keep her spot and keep her family's prominence.
All right, so we went through a lot of cultural things and how to act things and how to hold oath things and importance of things. So now we're going to get back into the Quentin Tarantino movie portion. So Grendel's mother is going to be coming now. They went to sleep, and one paid dearly for his night's ease, as happened to them often, ever since Grendel occupied the Gold Hall, committing evil until the end came, death after his crimes. Then it became clear, obvious to everyone once the fight was over, that an avenger lurked and was still alive. Grimly binding time, Grendel's mother, monstrous hellbride, brooded over her wrongs. She had been forced down into fearful waters and cold depths after Cain had killed his father's son, felled his own brother with a sword. Branded an outlaw marked by having murdered, he moved into the wilds, shunned company and joy. And from Cain there sprang misbegotten spirits, among them Grendel, the banished and accursed, due to come grips with the Watcher and Heorot, waiting to do battle. The monster wrenched and wrestled with him, but Beowulf was mindful of his mighty strength, the wondrous gifts God had showered on him. He relied for his help on the Lord of all, on his care and favor. So he overcame the foe, brought down the hell brute, broken and bowed outcast from all sweetness, the enemy of mankind made for his death den. But now his mother had sallied forth on a savage journey, grief-racked and ravenous, desperate for revenge, she came to Heorot. There inside the hall Danes lay asleep, earls who would soon enter a great reversal, for once Grendel's mother attacked and entered. Her onslaught was less only by as much an Amazon warrior's strength is less than an armed man's when he hefted a sword. Its hammered edge and gleaming blade slathered in blood raises the sturdy boar ridge off a helmet. Then in the hall, hard-honed swords were grabbed from the bench, many a broad shield lifted and braced. There was a little thought of helmets or woven mail when they woke in terror. The hell dam was in panic, desperate to get out, in mortal terror the moment she was found. She had pounced and taken one of the retainers in a tight hold and headed for the fen. To Hrothgar, this man was the most beloved of friends. He trusted between the two seas. She had done away with a great warrior, ambushed him at rest. Beowulf was elsewhere. Earlier, after the award of the treasure, the Geat had been given another lodging. There was an uproar in Heorot. She had snatched their trophy, Grendel's bloodied hand. It was a fresh blow to the afflicted bond. The bargain was haired, both parties having to pay with the lives of friends, and the old lord, the gray-haired warrior, was heart-sore and weary when he heard the news. His highest-placed adviser, his dearest companion, was dead and gone. Beowulf was quickly brought to the chamber. The winner of fights, the arch-warrior, came first footing in his fellow troops to where the king in his wisdom waited, still wondering whether Almighty God would ever turn the tides of his misfortunes. So Beowulf entered with his band in attendance, and the wooden floors banged and rang as he advanced, hurrying to address the prince and his Ingwins, asked if he had rested since the urgent summons had come as a surprise. All right, so Grendel's mother, they're having a good time. They're having a great feast. Everything is great. Beowulf is a hero. We're making oaths. We're adopting people as sons. We're sitting with nobility. We're receiving all of these wonderful gifts. The king is elated because his misery has been relieved and he feels his people are protected. They all party, go to bed, and then it happens again. And it's Grendel's mother this time. And this is where we start looking at the difference between Grendel and Grendel's mother. There is nothing in here that talks about the size of Grendel's mother. That's not a thing. It is made a point that Grendel is huge and huge monster. She is not described as a huge monster. She's described as terrifying. She is described as wrathful. She is described as in a mother's rage and suffering. That's how she's described. She's different. She's calculated. Grendel barges in and just starts snatching men up and throwing them in his purse and taking them off to eat them. She does not just come in for revenge and start hacking and slashing and murdering everybody. Oh, no, no, no. She takes the absolute dearest person to the king in this hall. His best friend and his confidant since childhood, his closest counselor. That is the person she takes. It's calculated, and it's almost like it's planned, and there's a big difference. Grendel had no qualms about who he was snatching up and biting the heads off. Did she just really happen to grab the one person that was closest to the king? I don't think so. And I think it shows the difference between Grendel and Grendel's mother. The calculated fury of a mother. The grief and the revenge that she has to seek. Knowing that she probably is not going to be able to go against all of these men the way that Grendel had in the past, she takes the nearest and dearest to the king. And she takes off. And it says in here, she was filled with terror. She took him and she ran. They heard a huge commotion. She was discovered. She grabs the best friend of the king and she takes off with him. Completely different personality of attack. So there was a question from Sarah earlier on, and we're going to get into this a little bit when we go into the next fit, but the question was, did Grendel's mom have a touch of humanity left somewhere in her that caused her to seek such revenge? Touch of humanity? Maybe. Touch of sanity that Grendel didn't have? Yes. There's something more to her than just the raw, primal monster within. There is something that is more cunning and more vengeful and more spiteful. And we can see that kind of in our lore as well when you have the difference between Ymir and the Jotuns that you face at Ragnarok, right? He is all primal and all energy and all raw. You have Jotuns down the line that are more calculated, they're more cunning, they use disguises and magic and things like that. It's a difference. Whether it's an evolution or not, can't really say because it's Grendel's mother, so that would make sense on a lineup. But the different battles that we face, the different battles that you face, it is not always the same monster, even if it's a related scenario. The monsters can get smarter, they can get harder, they can get more cunning. The monsters are not always the same. The battles you face are not always going to be the same. You can't fight them all the same, as we're going to see when we get into Grendel's mother here in a few minutes. Your thoughts on that, sir? Why did she pick him?
Well, I think exactly what you said. Because of his status, it's one of the things with vengeance. It wasn't about it would be dishonest to say that none of it was about punishing or hurting someone that hurt you. But the concept was more about, and in a bigger scale, about balancing scales. Someone took something from you, and you need to get back the value that was taken. and you cannot get the exact thing back because the world doesn't work like that. There's nothing you're going to do that's going to bring, nothing she could have done is going to bring Grendel back. So what can she get that brings an equivalent value or damages her foe in an equivalent way? Because that's the core of the Asatru concept of justice. It's not about punishment. There's time for that. But the fundamental is about rebalancing scales and about literally getting people to pay their debt to you. So every warrior in the hall is not equal. And it doesn't have to be Beowulf who happened to kill her son. It's how much value can she extract? What is the person of value? If, you've got a complete loser kid that's useless and he's the one that goes out and kills a member of my family in medieval Iceland, if I'm taking vengeance, I'm not going to go after your dullard kid. I'm going to go after the best you have that's equivalent to what I have. Because, some random dude you had do the job isn't the same as taking a prince. That's one of the things, taking the highest ranking guy she could find in the hall, because Beowulf was in a different chamber. That's an intentional, that's revenge. That is getting vengeance for the loss of her son, who to her was the most dear thing. That was all she had. But yeah, the difference is really different. But I think when dealing with our lore and when dealing with monsters and giants and things, I think we go too far trying to logify it. I don't think logify is a word, but I'm going to use it anyway. So, Loki has to take the form of a horse to give birth to Sleipnir. Okay. But he doesn't mate with a wolf to produce Fenrir. He doesn't mate with a serpent to produce Jormungand. The Jotnar and trolls and forces of chaos don't have to function in a logical way. A sentient, malevolent troll witch can give birth to a completely primal, bestial child like Grendel. It doesn't have to conform to biology as we know it, because these aren't biological creatures. They're mythological creatures. They're of something from the ether, not of something from, the biology book. And that's one of the things. I don't think they have to be. I don't think the pairing has to necessarily make sense. The difference is very obvious, that one is a primal, unthinking force of chaos that I hear joy must crush joy. And the other is very much, you took my son, how can I hurt you the most? And I'm going to get his arm off the wall because that's not cool. And there's much more thought to it. As a matter of fact, the three different monsters that Beowulf battles are three very different foes. And I think that's one of the things that adds a lot of richness to the story.
Yes. All right. Now, Hrothgar's not happy, obviously. Not only is his hall being attacked again, but one of his dearest friends has been snatched at the end of this. Then Hrothgar the Shielding's helmet spoke. Rest? What is rest? Sorrow has returned. Alas for the Danes, Ashir is dead. He was Jormungand's elder brother and soulmate to me, a true mentor, my right-hand man when the ranks clashed and our poor crest had taken a battering in the line of action. Ashir was everything the world admires in a wise man and a friend. Then this roaming killer came in a flurry and slaughtered him in Herat. Where she is hiding, gloating on the corpse and glorying in her escape, I cannot tell. She has taken up the feud because of last night when you killed Grendel, wrestled and racked him in when he was combat, since for too long he had terrorized us with his depredations. He died in battle, paid with his life. And now this powerful other one arrives, this force for evil, driven to avenge her kinsman's death. Or so it seems to thanes in their grief and the anguish everything endures at the loss of a ring giver, now that the hand that bestows so richly has been stilled in death. I have heard it said by my people in Hall, counselors who live in the upland country, that they have seen two such creatures prowling in the moors. Huge marauders from some other world. One of these things, as far as anyone can either discern, looks like a woman. The other, warped in shape of a man, moves beyond the pale, bigger than any man, an unnatural birth called Grendel by the country people in former days. They are fatherless creatures, and their whole ancestry is hidden in the past of demons and ghosts. They dwell apart among the wolves on the hills, on wind-swept crags, and the treacherous caches, where cold streams pour down the mountain and disappear into the mist of moorland. A few miles from here, a frost-stiffened wood waits and keeps watch above the mere, an overhanging bank in a maze of tree roots mirrored in its surface. At night there, something uncanny happens. The water burns, and the mere bottom has never been sounded by the sons of men. On its bank, the heather stepper halts. The heart in flight from pursuing hounds will turn to face them with firm set horns, and die in the wood rather than die beneath its surface. That is no good place. With wind blows up and stormy weather makes clouds scud and the skies weep. Out of its depth, a dirty surge is pitched towards the heavens. Now help depends again on you and you alone. The gap of danger where the demon waits is still unbeknown to you. Seek it if you dare. I will compensate you for settling the feud as I did the last time with lavish wealth, coffers of coiled gold if you come back. Okay, seriously, Hrothgar, you could have told me there was two to begin with, right? Like, he could have said something. There could have been, well, there's Grendel, but then there's this other Grendel's mother thing that's out there. This is the first time we're hearing about Grendel's mother. This is information Beowulf probably would have needed to know beforehand. So, moral of the story is, if somebody comes in to save you and save your entire kingdom and, like, take everything and make it better and save the entire world, you might want to give them all of the pertinent information ahead of time so you don't lose not only all of your people, but your best friend as well. So, if you are somebody who is in a position of leadership, make sure that you give your hero all the information he needs to probably take care of that in the first place. All right, that's my rant. They should have told Beowulf ahead of time. It wouldn't have made for such a good story, though, right? So basically, Hrothgar's speech is telling us, sorry, man, I went off on it.
No, you're fine. Nick muted me, not you. I was going to say the other thing to it is part of Hrothgar's shame at being unable to defend his hall and his men. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to advertise that there's more of it. He's like, all right, one and done. If this guy comes in and can, take out one of these guys, then maybe it'll be cool for a little bit. Maybe we'll be able to handle the next one. Maybe maybe it won't be a problem. No, he doesn't want to admit the depth of his inability to face the things that are arrayed against him.
Yep. Information we could have had yesterday would have been great. And basically what his speech, he's telling Beowulf exactly where to find her, right? So he's saying, okay, you turn left over there down by the moor, and then you're going to see some bubbling water, and I need you to jump in that water because that's where she apparently comes out of. He knew this the whole time. He knew it the entire time. All right. So Beowulf's going to go looking for Mom. This is where it gets a little bit interesting as well. Like I said, when I read these things, it's like a movie in my head. It's kind of awesome. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. Wise sir, do not grieve. It is always better to avenge dear ones than indulge in mourning. For every one of us living in this world means waiting for our end. Let whoever can win glory before death. When a warrior is gone, that will be his best and only bulwark. So arise, my lord, and let us immediately set forth on the trail of this trolldam. I guarantee you she will not get away. Not to the dens underground, nor upland groves, nor the ocean floor. She'll have nowhere to flee to. Endure your troubles today, bear up, and be the man I expect you to be. With that, the old lord sprang to his feet and praised God for Beowulf's pledge. Then a bit and a halter were brought for his horse with the plaited mane. The wise king mounted the royal saddle and rode out in style with a force of shield bearers. The forest paths were marked all over the monster's tracks. Her trail on the ground wherever she had gone across the dark moors, dragging away the body of that Thane, Hrothgar's best counselor and overseer of the country. So the noble prince proceeded undismayed, up fells and screes, along the narrow footpaths, and away and ways where they were forced into single file. Ledges on cliffs above lairs and water monsters. He went in front with a few men, good judges of the lie of the land, and suddenly discovered the dismal wood. Mountain trees growing out at an angle over gray stones, the bloodshot water surged underneath. It was a sore blow to all of the Danes, friend of the Shieldings, a hurt to cash in every one of the noble company when you came upon Ashir's head at the foot of the cliff. Everybody gazed at the hot gore, kept wallowing up an urgent war horn repeated its notes. The whole party sat down to watch. The water was infested with all kinds of reptiles. There were writhing sea dragons and monsters slouching on the slopes by the cliff, serpents and wild things such as those that are often surface at dawn to roam the sail road and doom the voyage. Down they plunged, lashing in anger at the loud call of the battle bugle. An arrow from the bow of the Geat chief got one of them as he searched the surface. The seasoned shaft stuck deep in his flank, and his freedom in the water got less and less. It was his last swim. He was swiftly overwhelmed in the shadows, prodded by barbed boar spears. Cornered, beaten, pulled up to the bank, a strangle-like birth, a loathsome catch. Men gazed at in awe. Beowulf got ready, donned his war gear, indifferent to death. His mighty hand-forged wine-webbed mail shirt would soon meet with the menace underwater. It would keep the bone cage of his body safe. No enemy's clasp could crush him in it. No vicious arm lock choke his life out. To guard his head, he had a glittering helmet that was due to be muddied on the mere bottom and blurred in the upswirl. If it were beaten gold, the princely headgear hooped and hasped by the Witan smith who had worked wonders, in days gone by and adorned with boar shapes, since it still had resisted every word. And another item lent by Unferth at the moment of need was of no small importance. The Brown handed him a hilted weapon, a rare and ancient sword named Hrunting. The iron blade with its ill-boding patterns had been tempered in blood. It had never failed the hand of anyone who hefted it in battle, anyone who had fought and faced the worst of the gap of danger. This was not the first time it had been called to perform heroic feats. When he lent the blade to the better swordsman, Unferth, the strong-built son of Ecglaf, could hardly have remembered the ranting speech he had made in his cups. He was not a man enough to face the turmoil of a fight under water and risk to his life. So there he lost fame and repute. It was different for the other, rigged out in his gear, ready to do battle. All right, so she has basically taken the king of the French. She has drug him through the woods. She has ripped his head off and left it sitting there for them to find. Again, different monster. She is hurting them in all the possible ways that she can hurt them. She's not only taking him, she's like ripping him apart and leaving a trail for them to find. That's disturbing. It shows you just how brutal she is and just how heinous and vengeful she is and just how hurt she is. Like we said, we're not dealing with just an out of his mind monster. We're dealing with not only a monster, but a woman who has lost a child, a mother on vengeance. And she is doing things like leaving the head of Ashir for them to find. They get to the water and there's all of these monsters and all of these things. And remember, your narrator is always going to prepare you. So we already know that Beowulf can probably deal with a singular sea monster. So now we're going to see what we can do with a whole bunch of them. Unferth gives him a sword, Hrunting. And the name of that sword is Hunting. And this is important to know because this sword has never failed. What we are being told up until this point is that this is an epic sword. It has never been swung in battle and failed. It has always been a champion. It has always won the battle. It doesn't miss. And Unferth is giving Beowulf a sign of peace and a sign of acceptance in giving him this sword. This is a familiar, an ancient sword, an epic sword that he's giving to Beowulf. It's a sign of extending that hand in peace. I am giving this to you. He is accepting that Beowulf is a better man than he is. And it says, there is no longer the memory of the way he talked to Beowulf when he got there. He's no longer challenging the awesomeness that is Beowulf. He has just accepted that he is the lesser, weaker man, and that he indeed is a coward. And he sure as hell isn't going to go in the water. But hey, Beowulf, I'll give you my sword. You can take my sword with you. Anything to add on that, sir?
Yeah, I think you covered that just fine. Nick,
I think
a bad noise on my end.
I think you're breaking up a little bit, sir.
I'm up because there's a lot of background about it. It's not. It cuts in my answer. I say you're covering this really well.
All right, so we're going to get into the last couple fits. We're going to go into probably two more, and I'm going to read these two together because they flow well together, and there's a lot of things in here that I'm going to point out just in these two. And it's pretty much the whole thing. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke, wisest of kings, now that I have come to the point of action, I ask you to recall what we said earlier, that you, son of Halfdane, and Goldfriend to the retainers, that you, if I should fall and suffer death while serving your cause, would act like a father to me afterwards. If this combat kills me, take care of my young company, my comrades in arms, and be sure also, my beloved Hrothgar, to send Hygelac the treasures I received. Let the Lord of the Geats gaze on that gold. Let Hrethel's son take note of it, and see that I found a ring giver of rare magnificence, and enjoyed the good of his generosity. And Unferth is to have what I inherited. To that far-famed man I bequeath my own sharp-honed, wave-sheened wonder-blade. With Hrunting I shall gain glory or die. After these words, the prince of the Weathergeats was impatient to be away, and plunged suddenly, without more ado, he dived into the heaving depths of the lake. It was the best part of the day before he could see the solid bottom. Quickly, the one who haunted those waters, who had scavenged and gone her gluttonous rounds for 100 seasons, sensed a human observing her outlandish lair from above. So she lunged and clutched and managed to catch him in her brutal grip. But his body, for all that, remained unscathed, and the mesh of the chainmail saved him on the outside. Her savage talons failed to rip the web of his worshippers. Then once she touched bottom, the wolfish swimmer carried the ring-mailed prince to her court, so that, for all his courage, he could never use the weapons he carried. And bewildering horde came at him from the depths, droves of sea beasts who attacked with tusks and tore at his chainmail and ghastly onslaught. The gallant man could see he had entered some hellish turnhole, and yet the water did not work against them, because the hall roofing held off the force of the current. Then he saw firelight, a gleam and a flare-up, a glimmer of brightness. The hero observed the swamp thing from hell, the Tarn hag in all her horrible strength. Then heaved his war sword and swung his arm. The decorated blade came down ringing and singing on her head, but he soon found his battle torch extinguished. The shining blade refused to bite. It spared her and failed this man in his need. It had gone through many hand-to-hand fights, had hewed the armor and helmets of the doomed, but here at last the fabulous powers of that heirloom failed. Hygelac's kinsmen kept thinking about his name and his fame. He never lost heart. Then in a flurry he flung his sword away. Then king-inlaid, worm-looped pattern steel was hurled to the ground. He would have to rely on the might of his arm. So must a man do who intends to gain enduring glory in combat. Life doesn't cost him a thought. And the prince of the war geats, warming to this fight with Grendel's mother, gripped her shoulder and laid about him in battle frenzy. He pitched his killer opponent to the floor. But she rose quickly and retaliated, grappled him tightly in her grim embrace. The sure-footed fighter felt daunted. The strongest of warriors stumbled and fell. So she pounced upon him and pulled out a broad, whetted knife. Now she would avenge her only child. But the mesh of the chainmail on Beowulf's shoulder shielded his life, turned the edge and tip of the blade. The son of Ecgtheow would have surely perished in the Geats lost their warrior under the wide earth, had the strong links and the locks of his war gear not helped save him. Holy God decided the victory. It was easy for the Lord, the ruler of heaven, to redress the balance once Beowulf had got back up to his feet. Then he saw a blade that boded well, a sword in her armory, an ancient heirloom from the days of the giants, an ideal weapon, one that one that any warrior would envy, but so huge and heavy itself, only Beowulf could wield it in battle. So the Scyldings' hero, hard-pressed and enraged, took a firm hold on the hilt and swung the blade in an arc, resolute blow. Then bit deep in her neck bone and severed it entirely, toppling the doomed house on her flesh. She fell to the floor. The sword dripped blood and the swordsman clattered. A light appeared and the palace brightened, the way the sky does when heaven's candle is shining clearly. He inspected the vault, the sword held high, its hilt raised to guard and threaten. Hygela's Thane scouted by the wall in Grendel's lake. Now the weapon was to prove its worth. The warrior determined to take revenge for every gross act Grendel had committed, not only for one occasion when he'd come to slaughter the weak, sleeping troops, 15 of Hrothgar's house guards surprised by their benches and ruthlessly devoured, and as many again carried away, a brutal plunder. Beowulf, in his fury, now settled the score. He saw the monster in his resting place, war-weary and wrecked, a lifeless corpse, a casualty of the Battle of Herat. The battle gaped at the stroke dealt after death. Beowulf cut the corpse's head off. Immediately, the counselors, keeping a lookout with Hrothgar watching over the lake water, saw a heave up and a surge of waves and blood in the backwash. They bowed gray heads and spoke in their sage, experienced ways about the good warrior, how they never expected to see the prince returning in triumph to their king. It was clear to many that the wolf of the deep had destroyed him forever. The 9th hour of the day arrived. The brave Scyldings abandoned the cliff top, and the king went home, but sick at heart. Staring at the mirror, the strangers held on. They wished without hope to behold their lord, Beowulf himself. Meanwhile, the sword began to wilt in gory icicles and slather and thaw. It was a wonderful thing the way it melted as ice melts when the father eases the fetters off the frost and unravels the water ropes. He who wields power over time and tide, he is the true lord. The geek captain saw treasure in abundance, but carried no spoils from those quarters except for the head and the inlaid hilt embossed with jewels. Its blade had melted in the scroll work on its burnout, so scalding was the blood of the poisonous fiend who had perished there. Then away he swam, the one who had survived the fall of his enemies, flailing to the surface. The wide water, the waves and pools, were no longer infested once the wandering fiend let go of her life in this unreliable world. The seafarer's leader made for land. Resolutely swimming, delighted in his prize, the mighty Lodi was lugging to the surface. His thanes advanced in a troop to meet him, thanking God and taking great delight in seeing their prince back safe and sound. Quickly the hero's helmet and the maelstrom were loosened and unlaced. The lake settled, clouds darkened above the bloodshot depths. With high hearts they headed away along footpaths and trails through the fields. Rows they knew, each of them wrestling with the heads that they were carrying from the lakeside cliff. Men kingly in their courage and capable of difficult work, it was task of 4 to hoist Grendel's head on a spear and to bear it to the strain of the bright hall. Yet soon enough they neared the place, 14 Geats in fine fettle, striding across the outlining grounds in delightful throng of their leader. In he came then, the Thane's commander, the arch-warrior, to address Hrothgar. His courage was proven, his glory was secure. Grendel's head was hauled by the hair, dragged across the floor where the people were drinking, a horror for both queen and company to behold. They stared in awe. It was an astonishing sight. All right, so that is the death of Grendel's mother. So a couple things difference, again, between the difference between Grendel and Grendel's mother. When we get into Grendel's mother's lair, she goes in there, she pulls him down. He's being attacked by all kinds of sea monsters because apparently every time Beowulf goes into the water, something wants to eat him, and he just has to fight sea monsters. Beowulf should probably just stay out of the water. However, when he gets down into the lair, he notices things about the lair. There's like an ambiance to it, right? There's light, there's a firelight. It's almost sounds cozy with its vaulted ceilings and things scattered all over the place. This is not just a mindless monster. This is something with thought and feeling and a sense of humanity in it. It is something that we can recognize. We can't recognize ourselves in Grendel. We can't recognize that insanity and that primalness, but we can recognize things of ourselves in Grendel, especially if you're a woman with a cozy little cottage and things hanging on the wall and the love for your child and the vengeance that you would seek. We can recognize that. And who was easier to kill, Grendel or Grendel's mother? They had a whole bunch of men with swords beating on Grendel, and it was like toothpicks being thrown at him. It didn't bother him at all. Beowulf was able to go toe to toe with Grendel and rip his arm off. Grendel feared Beowulf. Grendel's mother didn't. She was fighting to the death no matter what. She could have had him if he didn't have that mail on. She had her chance. She took it. It didn't work. She was harder to kill than Grendel. When you are in a battle for whatever it is that you're fighting for, the enemy that you recognize, the foe that you know, is much harder to fight and much harder to get over than an enemy that you don't recognize, a face that you don't know, somebody that you can't relate to. And it all goes back again to, you can't be betrayed by anyone but your friends. An enemy can't betray you, but your friends can. You always recognize the enemy that you recognize is always the hardest to kill and is always the hardest to deal with. Anything to add on that, sir?
No other than to reemphasize the distinctions that you just made. Grendel's just mean because he's a primal force of chaos and being mean and killing stuff that's happy. Whereas the mother has that intent. Grendel, it's funny because in her own way, she becomes more primal, but her primal is like a focus driven. I will kill this. I will kill this person no matter what. And her singleness of willpower makes her so very hard to overcome. Whereas Grendel doesn't have that. He's scared. He's a wounded animal. And she's not. She is a vicious killer of, I'm going to avenge my son, and I'm going to, pull out every last bit that I have to kill this man. And it's that directed intent is very, very different than, the lumbering monster that kills because it's what he does. But yeah, no, I that's the only thing I really have to add on that.
So Sarah's got a question about the two swords. So I'm going to answer kind of those both in one shot. Her first question was, do you think Unferth's sword failed because it had Unferth's germs were on it? And what do you think drew Beowulf's gaze to that one blade among so many other weapons that ended up being the right one to use? So this is something that we've actually discussed in the women's book study that we've had. And it's a point that my first mentor pointed out to me the first time that I got walked through Beowulf. Does Unferth's sword fail? The sword that does not fail, the sword that has never failed, it fails today. And if you look at the breakdown by all the people who argue over Beowulf on the internet, it's that, well, she's got a magic charm that no sword can touch her. But does she, though? Because a sword touched her. So that can't be it. And then you have the other ones that are like, well, it was a sword that was blessed by God. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say it was blessed by God. It said it had runes on it. So this is how I was walked through it the first time, and it made a lot of sense. And I kind of think it's a little bit beautiful. First of all, Unferth's sword that never failed. Yeah, Unferth was the last one to have that sword. No matter how strong your family is, no matter how undefeated your family is, if you damage your well, if you put poison in your well, your line is no longer undefeated. It is up to you to make sure that your honor and your family's luck continues on. and your community and your folk. You don't just get to carry the unbeatable sword, and you don't get to have it just because. If you are a coward and you have no courage and you run your mouth and you're really not worth that sword, you're going to taint the sword. Just like if you have no worth and you're kind of a pile and you break your oaths and you just talk shit all the time when you get in your cups, but you haven't really done anything of worth, you're tainting the honor of your people. So yes, Sarah, I would agree that's a thing. It's got Unferth cooties on it. It's got Unferth's bad luck on it. That is one theory of that, yes. But why is it that there's that one sword that works? When you look at the sword, if you look at Leslie Hall's version of it, the translation of it, as well as Tolkien's, they talk about it having runes on it. It was forged in the time of the giants. And it has the story that it actually has written on the sword is a story of a flood, right? Which would be going back to if our people are hearing this in an oral way, right? Like if they're hearing the story in those times prior to Christianity, they're going to think of the killing of Ymir and all of the flood that ensued from there, right? The killing of chaos, the managing of chaos, and the order that came from it. So that sword itself is very much order defeating chaos. The way my mentor explained it to me, why did the sword melt? The only thing that was left of the hilt. And this was kind of a lesson that he bestowed upon me. When you are going up against life, or when you are going through a moment in your spirituality where it's kind of a battle and you're experiencing something, you're having an awakening of your own. You can tell people all day long about the battle that you fought and your experience with the gods and your experience with this whole thing. But in the end, all you have to show them is the result. The blade melts, the battle is done. There is no monster for them to see, but what you have in your hand is this beautiful jeweled hilt. And that beautiful jeweled hilt is what you learned and what you became because of those things that you went through and because of your personal experience that you can't explain to somebody else. All you can show them is the result of that. I can't tell you about my personal relationship and experience with this because I can't put it into words. But I can show you that I am a better person since I found the gods, since I have started venerating my ancestors, since I joined the AFA. I can show you my hilt. I can show you my result. So that's the story that I like to tell with that. And do we have any other questions, or do you have anything else to add on that, sir?
Just that there were generic utility weapons that smiths would just crap out that were random, and then there were blades that get named. We don't hear a name of this blade, but it's ancient. It's as ancient as is fathomable by the audience. It's from a primordial time before man. When you name a blade gets a destiny, and it has a fate, and it has certain elements of character to it. One way to look at its dissolving is it has met its purpose, as if it was fated from the most ancient of times to put away this particular piece of chaos. And once it served its purpose, it dies. It coincides with the light conquering the darkness. There's this firelit cave where this monster lives chaotically with her freakish chaos son, and they've got all this booty. This is this is an outpost of chaos in the world. When she is slain, order takes over the chaos, and there's a beachhead of order in this land of chaos, and the light overcomes the darkness. That theme happens as that blade meets its destiny and fulfills its purpose. The light shines, and I think that's really important too. And yeah, it's hard to tell. It's hard to know exactly what was in the poet's mind, but yeah, I think the blade fails because of Unferth's bad Haminya and bad luck that he's put into it, because it taints things. You can come into the world with the most amazing orlog, the most amazing heritage, and with such an amazing hand, and you can still squander it and screw it up by being a dirtbag. And I think that's one of the things. You can have this magnificent storied weapon that is like the best sword around, but if it's kept in the company and wielded by and worn by a person of low character, it loses its might. The blessings on the sword leave it. And I think that's the same thing for a lot of things, for relationships, for stuff. You can poison the things around you and cause luck to flee from them by getting your ick on them.
And I just want to point out, Unferth can't do anything right, not even lend a sword. He can't do anything right. I hate Unferth. Just gonna add that for the end. Unferth does nothing right. So that's what we've got. Grendel's mother is dead. So I think that's probably where we're gonna end it on here. And then in our next one, we're going to get into the celebration and the party following Grendel's mother's death, Beowulf's return home, his rule over his kingdom, and his battle with a dragon. I can't hear you, sir.
That was my fault this time because I muted myself. So do we have any questions in the queue that we did not get to?
Let's look.
Yeah, I'm looking, and it looks to me like we got them.
Oh, we have one from Nick. So when we were talking about oaths, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does it relate to holding of oaths made at Sumbul? They are the responsibility of the whole congregation, the self-lord beneath the group. So who's responsible for those oaths at Sumbul?
I mean, that's the thing, honestly, and I think that we can overplay it. We're not writing an epic poem to where everything needs to be carried to the most extreme. It's obviously the person who makes them, and you're going to be over some horns where people say dumb things. But it's the responsibility of the one making it. But if you're there and you assent to it and the group assents to it, there's an obligation to do what you can to try to make sure that gets fulfilled. And we do take it seriously, and that's why is to reinforce that. That's why we approve oaths before they're made, or stop people if they didn't get an oath approved before they make it. But people are going to let you down, and you're going to be in the company of people that are of low character, because we live in the wolf age and many people are of low character. Unfortunately, that's the thing. You try to mitigate it as much as you can. And in the same way that you're harmed if someone of low character is sharing a horn with you, you are elevated if you are sharing the horn with heroes. And so you do what you can to protect yourself over the horn, but I don't ever think that you should this was one of the things that I asked my mentor early on, because I'd only ever done Stumble at my house with close friends of mine, and I was coming to my first AFA event and doing Stumble with some people of questionable value. And he said, that's why you build up a certain amount of armor with your Hamenya, is so you can take some hits if you need to, because just as you're lessened by doing Stumble with unsavory people, you're elevated by doing Stumble with great people. And, you know, the couple of people that were at Midsummer that year that maybe weren't the best folks, do you think that, you know, Matt, do you think your Hamenya benefited? Were you more damaged by sharing a horn with those people than you were elevated by sharing a horn with Stephen McNallen? And I think that's something important to consider. And you can never get it perfect, but you want to err on the side of, you know, trying to stack more wins than you stack losses in that, and surrounding yourself with, it's not 100% or zero game. So you want to do your best to keep yourself in good company. It's not the end of the world if somebody who's a dirtbag slips in, but the more you can counterbalance that with heroes and great people, the better, and do what you can to take precautions to where you're not knowingly letting people of poor value in that circle.
You did have two more questions that I want to answer. So the first question was, I think that's all we have left. Who do you think could make and direct a great movie or TV show based on Beowulf? Quentin Tarantino. That's got my vote.
Yuck, I don't like Quentin Tarantino. I dislike him greatly. And he's just so flippant. I don't think he would take it seriously. I'd say Jon Favreau.
Okay. The Alshira Gothic disagrees with me, so we'll go with the Alshira Gothic decree. Quentin Tarantino cannot make the movie. All right, and best Beowulf translation. I would prefer to read Leslie Hall. That's the translation that I like the best. But Tolkien is really good as well, so those would be my top two. Do you have any preferences, sir?
I have no preferences. I'm not that guy. I think there's good things about each. There's not one translation I was reading and had to like throw it down in disgust. I am entertained by Seamus Haney's version just because my mentor I was talking about earlier that had the conversation about Hamenya with me was a very proud Englishman, and he was completely disgusted that this Irishman was translating this stuff. And you know, Seamus would throw in some like Irish colloquialisms, and that offended him and was a source of merriment for me. So I have fond memories of Seamus Haney's version just for that barb.
I think that is all of our questions. Do you have anything else to add tonight, sir?
No, once again, great job on this. It's really a privilege to have you on here. Both explaining it and literally reading the text. It's nice when we have something small enough that we can read the whole text, people can hear it. There's a lot of people that are listening to this that may have never encountered this before, and I think that's awesome. So thank you for that. As always, I appreciate my audience. You guys are what fuels so much of this with your questions and your participation. Really appreciate you. Yeah, I don't have any breaking news until next time. Please join us next week as Svan and I talk about Yule and various Yule traditions, and as Svan talks about the pig face. Till next time, hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember, victory never sleeps.